Hello and welcome to day 2 of this year's Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit, brought to you by HardenStance's and our event partner, St Albans Web Design. Many thanks once again to our sponsors who are NETSCOUT, Flowsec, HardenStance's, NetNumber, and I can't see it because of what I've got something here, which is, of course, Flowsec. My apologies to Flowsec for having them blanked out for that brief moment. So we saw yesterday that the two core themes of this year's Threat Intelligence Summit are the usual one, telecom security operations, and we're going to be hearing a whole lot about that over the course of day 2, but also the growth in online fraud and the impact that is having on people across the world, both in terms of the volume of impacts and the scale of the impacts now. So we heard about that yesterday. We're going to be hearing a lot more about that during the course of today. What a day we had yesterday. We heard about ideas of segmenting the network differently in the interests of greater simplicity. The idea of segmenting the network by planes rather than zones. We heard about threat actors hiding in legacy telco protocols. One of the biggest sentences I heard all day yesterday. I heard about behavior mimicry for the first time in terms of DDoS threats, whereby bots are now, with AI assistance, they're learning to behave as if they're human beings, give the impression that there's a human being tapping away at a keyboard behind the bot when, of course, there is no such thing. Some very interesting stuff there. We will learn more on the fraud side today in terms of measures. We learned yesterday about protecting against CLI, malicious CLI spoofing. We learned about a fraud prevention registry and something new launched by NetNumber. And today we're going to hear from the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, which has some real momentum in terms of bringing folks together to combat fraud across the telecom, banking, finance, law enforcement, and other sectors. Before moving to our first speaker, I'm just going to say one small word about timekeeping. Those of you who attended yesterday may have noticed that we went unusually long. Our speakers were able to speak for quite a bit longer than their normal allocated time. Now, the reason for that is that we had a missing speaker yesterday. Somebody had to pull out, so we had to allow people to speak longer in order to fill that gap. There will be no such leniency today. Now, we are moving to correct timekeeping. I'm going to be decidedly German in my timekeeping during the course of day 2, which of course is a very crude but I hope amusing segue to our very first speaker, who is Thomas Tschersich, the Chief Security Officer of Deutsche Telekom. Thomas has been a very good friend to HardenStance's over the last many years. I think this is his second time speaking at this event. Very grateful to Thomas for showing up. Thomas, we're going to hear from you on the subject of 360 degrees of security, which should be a very interesting way to kick us off. Thomas, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thanks, Patrick, for having me. And I try to be German here also with regards to time on this. Look, we have quite some interesting speeches had already here in the summit, which are digging deep into technology and digging deep into threats. What I now try to do is to lift that view a bit up again, up more in the air, and look on the problem from the height of 10,000 feet. And trying to show you how we see the world and how we treat security these days. So when you look on that pictures here, there is conflicts and challenges all around the planet, right? Security, and this is here my main message, is these days much more than just cybersecurity. When I talk to peers in telco business, we often tend to focus just on the technical stuff and on very detailed things like what are bad actors doing here in cyber and the like. But we need to broaden that view much more, like we're convinced to have a 360-degree perspective on the topic. So what do we mean by 360 degree? 360 degree means that we have identified for us 6 strategic security, let's say, environmental areas, which I gonna deep dive into in a minute. So we're talking about geopolitics. We're talking about criminality. We're talking about regulation, technology, environment, and workforce. All these have big influence on our threat exposure and have big influence on how we are able to protect our environments, our telco networks these days. So on the next slide here, I've put a more detailed view here, and I will go through it one by one, starting with the environmental stuff. Of course, threats can only arise out of environmental stuff. Like we had these extreme weather conditions and flood events in Germany. We had wildfires in Greece, in the US. Of course, this is also hitting our networks. So you can now argue this is not a cyber stuff. This is not a modern security kind of thing, but it's impacting the networks. It's impacting the infrastructure, and therefore we have to have that in our minds. And these things not being proactively I'm searching for the word here, prepared for those threats arising here can also create huge harm to our infrastructures these days, as, for instance, cyber criminals can do. The next area, talking about workforce, we have a huge demographic change in Western European countries in front of us. And if we want to grow, that's still not possible by just doing it in the same way than we did it in the past. So it will become a challenge to find skilled people. In Germany, just to give you a number, we will lose around 20% of the labor force to retirement in the next 4 years. So that's Germany in total. How to replace that? How to replace that labor shortage without moving into technology, without changing the way of operations, and you will see there is dependencies between other of those areas. We need to consider to do more shoring, which is causing another threats, like geopolitical threats. If you go to India, for example, there's also geopolitical conflicts between India and Pakistan. If you go to China these days, we have huge debates here in Europe, at least, about how trustworthy is a Chinese supply chain. The same with the US. Yeah, so it's a lot of dependencies here, and we need to face those challenges. What we need to do, at least also when going into classical shoring models, we need to ensure that I call it smart shoring approaches. So we need to build career paths also for employees there. Otherwise, if you just out-task the prolonged workbench to those countries, you will end up in very huge attrition, and you will not really grant a stable environment also in your defense against criminal activities, for example. So if talking about the next area, geopolitics, geopolitical conflicts can really create huge harm on our infrastructures, at least on the supply chain in our infrastructures. We've seen, and this was, of course, not driven by geopolitics, how fragile our supply chain could be when the container ship was stuck in the Suez Channel. There was router suppliers not any longer able to deliver their machines to us because the filter mats, the inlets from the routers were on that container ship. So they were not able to send the new equipment to us to supply us. What if it's not a container ship stuck for a week or two in a channel? What if it's a geopolitical conflict lasting for a year or a decade? Our supply chain is mainly based as Europeans, mainly based on Asian supply capabilities and on US-based supply capability. We are often talking about these high-tech chipsets and the like, but part of the reality is as well, there's a lot of low-cost, low-end components like capacitors, like resistors, coming 100% from those markets as well. So we're in a heavy dependency here, and this dependency can be used as a weapon as well in an economic war, but also in a real war in the cyber environment. What if we're not able to get any longer licenses to protect our infrastructures? What if we not get longer components like firewalls and you name them to be able to defend cyber attacks? So, of course, this is a big harm to us and can potentially become a big harm to us. Criminality, I guess this is the most usual topic when talking about threat intelligence summit here. We'll talk about crime actors, what they're able to do. Well, we see more and more that criminality and geopolitics is coming together. Crime actors being used, at least from Russia, for instance, to demonstrate the political power to generate uncertainty and fear in certain markets, like we've seen with these DDoS gangs, using DDoS for organized crime, blackmailing on companies after short attempt of a DDoS attack, and if you not pay, of course, the major attack started again. We see these days a lot of DDoS attacks coming without any blackmailing anymore, which indicates that there is nation states also behind, because there is no more financial interest behind. So a lot of these things also interlinked here. Regulation sounds for the moment a bit weird to call it like a threat, but I can tell you, in Germany, meanwhile, if we would have an incident, we would report, or we need to report to 5 different authorities in 5 different formats. And now coming back to workforce and skill shortage, we need the experts for solving the problem instead for reporting, but we have more and more reporting obligations we have to fulfill. All of them make sense if you look isolated on it, but in total, we can't go like we do today. Otherwise, we will not being able to defend our infrastructures as the majority of the people do, then more the bureaucratic work instead of the real defense work here. So we have to have an eye on it. And the other thing is here that we have, at least it feels like that, year by year, new and upcoming regulation, which is creating much more effort, or putting much more effort on us. From time to time, it's okay, because if industry is not really able to solve a problem, it's okay when the nation state acting and start with regulations. But from time to time, it's contradicting the aim of creating more security, and just by reporting obligations, you don't create more security. I've never met a hacker before who decided not to attack Deutsche Telekom because we're kind of certified or these kind of obligations. Last area here, technology. There is a lot of things happening around us, AI-generated attacks, and I will come to that in a minute in a more deeper view, and no speech without AI these days. But there's also other things coming. Computing powers raising from year to year. Eventually, we will end up in quantum computers some days, which is creating different challenge on the implementation of crypto algorithms. But also these AI-generated attacks is a really new kind of danger to our infrastructures, because how can you be sure that I'm the one intended to be here in that call? I could be generated by an AI, and in real, this is Patrick having my speech instead of just myself having it. How can you be sure on that? So we're entering an age where we can't trust our eyes and our ears anymore. So this will do something to us as a society. And at the same time, it's also great opportunities for telcos, as we do have with those mobile devices here, digital identities out in the field. We know our customers. We have the identity called SIM in this case. So why not make use out of it to create a more end-to-end security again, to ensure at least that it's the device of the person intended to be, and this is at least generating a bit more trust than we have today in those environments. So my deep dive here on AI, it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge at the same time. Of course, and I talked about the demographic change. Without AI, we can't really face this demographic change in a sufficient way. So we need to automate. We need to use technology to become better. And at least everybody listening here, working in cyber defense, know we're not any longer searching for needles in haystacks. We're searching for needles in needle stacks. So without AI and those kind of technology, we're not able to do our jobs in future anymore. But at the same time, we have vulnerabilities in models like LLMs. We have much better phishing capabilities than ever before. We have also chatbots in darknet helping bad actors to generate fraud, to generate malware and the like we're using the technology on the white side of the medal as well. Deepfakes are becoming more robust than ever before. And this is here just a selection of the things. And think about the training of the LLMs. This is the most expensive stuff when building those models. So in future, a lot of companies trying to save costs by just not sufficient training, or they're just cutting down the training efforts, which will then eventually enter in having models who should have moral bias inside, but not having this moral bias anymore because it's not sufficient trained, and then it can be abused by bad actors. So, click the next slide. And sorry here, the layout is a bit weird of the slide deck. What are we doing here as Deutsche Telekom? We're in principle organized ourselves here in 3 different areas. The first thing is defeat AI. So we protect ourselves against AI-supported attacks. This is investing in penetration testing, chatbot testing, and the like, but it's also trying to make use out of this technology to find vulnerabilities in that same technology. What do I mean by that? So we have invented AI, which is testing AI. So which is trying to find out whether the training is sufficient, whether it's not sufficient. Because at the very end, AI is mainly statistics, and so you can use technology to test that technology. But you need to think about your chatbot from your company start talking bad about your company, or it start giving mobile plans for free to the customers just because you asked for it. And to figure out whether it's possible or not, you need to have these training efforts, these testing efforts here. The second thing is utilize AI. So we protect ourselves in cyber defense by using more and more automation. Of course, we do it for almost decades in cyber defense. Nevertheless, with new LLMs or agentic models, it's becoming more efficient than ever before. So this is really about to replace analysts and to focus the rare capabilities of analysts on the task you can't automate. So it's really freeing up the resources here. And this, again, is counting on the demographic challenges we have. So we can see it's all connected to each other. And last but not least, it's protect our customers' security solutions powered by AI. So here's a lot of effort in consulting. And of course, cyber defense we provide to our customers. One example here is typically we ask customers at telco sector to install something on their mobile phones, to install apps and the like, to have very difficult engineered UIs where they can put their filter rules and the like in. with AI, we can make it much easier and customers just protected by subscribing a mobile plan without touching their phones, without configuring anything. So this technology can also bring us to a different level here. So at the end, AI itself will not protect the business. It's about the people who make the difference here. I'm strongly convinced AI will not do the CISO job in future and will not replace us. It is a strong and powerful tool for us. It's a strong and powerful tool which helps us to survive also in this 360-degree. It is a tool which gives us much faster answers than we got it in the past or got it in present. Nevertheless, we still will rely on people. We need to have the people to invent the next things which can't be automated yet, and it will be an ongoing journey for the future. With that, I hope, Patrick, in time, and we have some time for questions left.
Of course. Thank you, Thomas. So, yes, I'd invite audience members to submit any questions they have in the Q&A tab. I've got my eagle eyes on those. We have a few minutes, so I'm more than happy to spend those going through these questions with Thomas. I'll start with questions of my own, but welcome other people, of course, to submit theirs. First question, Thomas, then. I think in your opening remarks about the importance of viewing cyber as just one of many enterprise business risks that organizations have to face, and seeing cyber as part of the broader risk environment makes perfect sense, of course. But I wonder whether that is uniquely relevant to the very, very top of any organization. I wonder whether that is in any way relevant further down the organization to folks in the cybersecurity team. It strikes me that is primarily something for people at your level and maybe one level down, but much below that level, cyber folks just carry on doing whatever it is they have to do, right? And never mind the environmental and geopolitical risk. Would that be right?
I agree. It's not yet, but it should be. It should be, because just take the example of the demographic challenge. If you don't consider that's to become a problem, you will not automate your workflows. You will not create extra effort to be much faster in this kind of automation things, because you assume it will always last like it is today. So therefore, it's important, in my view, for an entire organization up to the lowest level to understand this interlinkage and the dependencies between those things. So we can't just rely on our single pillars sitting in our silos or cylinders of excellence, or you ever might call it.
Understood. Yeah, and by the way, I mean your number I was really struck by. I think you said Germany is going to lose 20% of its workforce in the next 4 years. Is that an especially acute problem in Germany? I don't see the UK talking about a number like that, for example.
Yeah, it's maybe a bit harsher in Germany compared to other Western European countries, but nevertheless, the trend is always the same. Whether it's 20% in 4 years or whether it's just 10-15%. Look, typically, industry wants to grow, right? And to keep the engine running, you need at least to have a growth of 3 to 5% annually for a company. And 3 to 5% is typically the rate of optimization you can achieve. So at least that means you need to have the same level of resources to face that growth when you assume there is automation happening and the like. But if out of a sudden you have less resources available, you can't keep that pace anymore. And that's a big challenge in Germany, especially. And of course, it will hit first sectors like waiters, like healthcare, sectors where you have low salaries typically. But maybe a year later or 2 years later, it will also hit the high-tech sector as well. And we need to prepare for that.
Right. So, second question here. I'm delighted that the audience is leaving the questions entirely to me. That's great. Oh, wait a minute. No, we have one. No, that's to someone else. Okay. You mentioned agentic AI, Thomas, and at RSA in San Francisco a couple of months ago, AI was the single biggest theme, of course, but actually agentic AI featured fairly prominently. And there were a couple of product releases claiming agentic AI capabilities. I'm thinking of CrowdStrike, Google, one or two others, talking about having stuff out there that's generally available or shortly to be generally available. And there's some smoke and mirrors in amongst all that you would recognize. What is your assessment of the maturity of agentic AI in terms of its applicability to cyber defense?
That's a very good question, because these days nearly everybody is selling AI and is telling you we do have agentic AI and the like already implemented. A lot of this stuff is still machine learning, because there was a change in the definition of AI a couple of years ago, which since then also included machine learning. So now you can call machine learning also as part of the AI. And seriously, I would argue 95% these days is still machine learning. Nevertheless, if you look and take Gemini, the Google Gemini for security, for instance, it's really like a personal assistant sitting next to you as an analyst. You can ask them question in natural language, so this is really a game changer. It's like talking to a colleague, asking him to perform some task for you in your natural language. So this is for me a big lever for the future to become more efficient. And this is just the first step, because in that case, it's AI as an assistant. It's not AI taking over the analyst job, but there's a lot of things AI can take over already. If I look into our cyber defense center, a typical run book from our analyst is consisting out of 150 to 200 steps. In the past, it was all manually done. So the analyst has to look into different databases, collect bits and pieces, put them all together to get the full picture. These days, it's 90% automated. So, and think about AI is really then taking same conclusion that human beings are taking on that. If you just train the AI by how would have an analyst solve that question here? And this is what's currently happening. This is what, just as an example, and others do as well, but what Google with Gemini is showing, what also others like Microsoft with Copilot for Security is doing, CrowdStrike, Cisco, you name them, all of the big vendors working on those topics. And this will really disrupt the way we're working today in cyber defense.
Let me ask another question then, which I mean, you've alluded to supply chain resiliency across China and Asia. Sorry, across Asia and US from a European perspective. Let me ask you, if you would, to articulate maybe what is Deutsche Telekom's position with respect to digital sovereignty and all of the technical and political challenges that go around that. What is Deutsche Telekom's view of digital sovereignty and how to achieve it?
First, you have to answer the question, what is really meant by digital sovereignty? Does it mean you become fully independent? So that's wishful thinking in my view. So to become fully independent as Europeans again would mean we need to invest for the next 20 plus years to rebuild all the supply capabilities being built in the last decades around the planet. So as this is not the solution, not probably not working, digital sovereignty for me is more about to be able to inspect, to measure and judge on the security level on different products. So it has a lot to do with transparency on the code being deployed or being used, the ability to inspect those, the ability to prove that the hardware is really functioning like it's intended to be. So certification and the like is a bit of a step in that direction. And another step is to have alternative choices and to build alternative choices. We won't be able to replace the entire supply chain coming from the US and coming from Asia. And this doesn't make any sense because we want to benefit from innovations as well, right? But we should have an alternative. And so for that, we at Deutsche Telekom driving what we call geo-redundant second source supply strategy. So very difficult word here. But what means actually, if you have one source coming out of China, it's always a good idea to have another source coming from the US or even a third one coming from Europe. And then you can balance out a bit. So dependency on supply chain will not get away, but you have at least some alternatives. And in case of a geopolitical crisis, it's still then big effort to entirely switch to a certain vendor. But if you don't train the muscle with the vendor, it's even a harder step in those cases.
Right. I'm going to ask one more question, if I may. We do have time. So in terms of your opening remarks with respect to the 360-degree view of all aspects of security and resiliency that you referred to, what implication does that have? How do you map those requirements as you articulated them? How does that affect your role going forward over the next 3 years and the role of your peers in other telcos? If you take the prescription that you provided of what's required, how does that map to the role of Chief Security Officer or Chief Information Security Officer in a telco?
Let me try to make an example here. If you take telecommunication fraud, signaling fraud, or whatever, there's different motivations behind. There might be crime actors using those technologies and those threats to follow their targets, but there might be nation states, and it's total different animal to protect you against nation state attacks, right? So they have different capabilities. You need to focus also on different aspects. Like what we're seeing these days is that a lot of threat actors, especially coming from Asia, Korea is very popular in this, is trying to cheat remote workers, bring in remote workers into the companies, trying to abuse those technologies then and get access to those technologies, which then brings you to different approaches in how to protect the entire environment. Then it's not any longer just about having the firewall for SS7 signaling or whatever kind of protocols. Then it's all of a sudden becoming also having a better view on who is working on what and how you're hiring new people and this process. So this is what I mean by the 360 degree, because the threat which looks like just being an outside threat can out of a sudden become an inside threat when nation state actors with their abilities try to ingest people into your organization, for example, just as one example. So you need to broaden the view here out of technology. For us, that meant we put it, and we decided a couple of years ago to put cybersecurity and all the other security, physical and personal security, together in one unit. It's not splitted anymore. A lot of organizations have that still splitted, different responsibility. Often they don't talk to each other because they're trying to shield their silos, or they would call it cylinders of excellence, right? We're not silos, we have cylinders of excellence. But at the very end, it's shielding. And if you shield, you miss out important part of the game these days.
Yeah, understood. What a terrific presentation and conversation, Thomas. Greatly appreciate you participating in the Threat Intelligence Summit and hope to see you again sometime. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Patrick, and successful summit.
Thank you. Actually, Thomas's last comment there about SS7 signaling couldn't possibly have been better timed because it's going to be one of the subjects that's touched on by our next speaker. I think I mentioned in yesterday's introduction that Nokia is one of the very few vendors that has a substantial play for customized security operations solutions. And our speaker next from Nokia is Dr. Srinivas Bhattiprolu. I promise you, Srinivas, I didn't actually ask Thomas to make that segue into SS7 signaling, but it couldn't have been better. The floor is now yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patrick. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone from the sunny California. We're going to be talking about SS7 exploits and how AI-powered attacks could potentially provide a mitigation plan for these SS7 exploits. And as you rightly said, Thomas's last statement kind of provides a great segue into this. So let's start the presentation. Telecom sector has really become a prime target for state-sponsored attackers, people with criminal background, and other malicious actors. The crown jewels that exist in the telecom sector, whether it is subscriber data, whether it is call records, whatnot, I think is actually giving a tremendous amount of opportunity for these attackers to come in. Of late, over the past 1 year, we have seen several attacks that have actually happened on the critical infrastructure. I can name quite a few, but I would like to give you a very short examples of what has happened. For example, Salt Typhoon and Bolt Typhoon. While Bolt Typhoon was pretty much focused on the critical infrastructure like utilities, transportation, etc., Salt Typhoon was pretty much on the US state. Which is actually on the telco infrastructure, where the state actors really infiltrated major telecom providers, and then basically they've adopted stealthy attacks and exploited the weaknesses in the critical infrastructure, and then focused on extracting and exfilling information about high net worth individuals, which was a big issue in US telco service providers, and everybody got impacted, and there were a long drawn cycles that the operators had to run in order to make sure that they are actually protecting themselves from any such future attacks. Recently, in SK Telecom, we had a sophisticated intrusion in its core infrastructure, where malicious actors actually implanted a malware in their HSS home subscriber system, which is their subscriber database, and they actually had USIM cloning attack. So this was another major issue. 23 million subscribers of SK Telecom lost their data, and the impacts are far-reaching, which are beyond the loss of subscribers. Also, it affected their brand value and brand equity as well. In O2, there was a system misconfiguration that exposed the locations of subscribers. So that was another major issue. We also had a recent attack in the month of May with Celcom Insight, where the critical infrastructure was attacked, and we still finding ways and means to actually find out the genesis and the anatomy of the attack. What I would like to really say is telecom sector is now becoming a prime target, and that's something which we all have to really take cognizance of. Now, I think Thomas did talk about SS7. SS7 protocol is everywhere in telco services. It powers roaming and messaging, but it was built long way back, and it was never built for a secure for robust security, which means the developers who were actually building in the SS7 stack in the past didn't anticipate the type of attacks that they will have to be content with today and tomorrow. So this remains widely exposed and abused. So that's something which is very, very important to note. Then we call it interconnected by design and trust. CSPs depend on global trust relationships. So basically what attackers can do is exploit these links by bypassing the border defenses and uneven security across operators. And I think no two operators are same, no two countries are same. Even the same country, no two operators have a similar cyber defense mechanism or SOC processes. So attackers, whether they are state-sponsored attackers or malicious actors who are coming in from different organizations, can pretty much utilize new techniques or even old techniques that are proven and build new zero-day threats to take full advantage of these attacks. So what we have is two ends of the spectrum. We have the legacy infrastructure, and then you have the new age attack. So that's something which we need to really take cognizance of. And SS7, as I mentioned, this is a protocol that is everywhere, but then is quite vulnerable. Now, let's look at some of the telecom signaling threats that we can talk about. The first one is location tracking. So attackers can exploit signaling to pinpoint the exact location of the subscriber. So this is a big concern for telcos. Just imagine high net worth individuals who are actually utilizing the services of the telco. And if their location can be pinpointed by the attackers, I mean, the opportunities to exploit them, their presence are actually galore. There are quite a few challenges that telcos will have to face today. We can talk about DDoS. Now in DDoS or denial of service, DOS. I mean, we can actually have signaling storms or SMS floods to really impair the availability part of the CIA triad for the operator. So that's a big issue that operators will have to be content with. Swim swapping and hijacking the numbers. I think this is something that we've already experienced in Vodafone Portugal, I think way back in 2022. So this is another possibility that you can really utilize the SS7. You can ride on the SS7, exploit the vulnerabilities that are associated within the SS7 and cause a severe damage to the telco. So that's something which we got to really look at. As we move on, I think it is very clear, and Thomas's presentation did allude to this. Threat actors are really weaponizing AI. You can expect new zero-day threats. You can expect new and novel attacks. These attacks are becoming a lot more sophisticated. These attacks are becoming a lot cheaper to actually look for or subscribe for. And there are several examples that are actually given here. So let me take a couple of important ones. Phishing and social engineering. Basically, AI can today create very highly convincing phishing messages. For example, in 2024, scammers used AI-generated WhatsApp messages to really impersonate investment firms and coax individuals to make investment decisions. So this is something which we can really look at. You could impersonate any individual and make it look like it is quite genuine. Deepfake voices and video attacks, and we have seen this in the US as well with the Lingo Telecom case, where there was a fraud after transmitting a deepfake robocall to the voters. And I think the government did find Lingo Telecom there. Or you could actually impersonate a CFO of an organization through a robocall and actually coax some of the employees to bypass authentication mechanism. So that's something which is very important to note. The third point that I would like to highlight is AI-generated malware. Today, AI can generate very effective, efficient malware, and this can self-modify itself, self-mutate, and it can continue to multiply and then move across the network laterally to create enough damage. 2016, we've seen the Mirai botnet getting compounded, and that's something which we all need to take cognizance of. And these kind of attacks will continue to come in. There are others as well, which is basically a credential theft and identity attacks and enhanced fraud in telco scams. All of these can pretty much be done more effectively and efficiently through AI, and weaponizing AI is one of the biggest challenges that operators are confronted with today. As we move along, I would like to really refer back to Patrick's own article that came out recently. Good enough security isn't good enough for telcos where there are sophisticated nation states in play. I think I suggest that you all should look at it, and let me put it in a different way. Trying to deploy these traditional IT tools for telcos or critical infrastructure is almost tantamount to putting a square plug in a round hole. What I would like to state is you cannot assume that the IT tools which are working very fine with applications or IT applications would work the same for the telco sector as well, or the critical infrastructure as well. It's the difference between IT and OT, as they call it. And then there are several nuances like the diversity of the network that will really contribute to the complications that are involved. So it's something that is very, very important, and all of us to really take cognizance of, to really look at the tool chain, the people, the processes, and the performance indicators separately for securing the critical infrastructure or the telecom infrastructure. Now, I think the biggest aspect which we're talking about is the hybrid anomaly detection. Early detection, in our view, is a key for protecting mission critical environments. So here there is a very clear approach and a kind of a workflow that we've actually provided here. So it starts with a binary analyzer that flags real-time anomalies and refines results, and really reduces the false positives and negatives to lower than 1%. We did talk about, the previous presenters did talk about some of the challenges that we have today in the security space with regard to the availability of the manpower. So that's something so as you hand over majority of these detection aspects to AI, I think you can really do a good job in terms of training the AI models, and the initial detection and validation can pretty much be handled by AI in a very effective manner. Then you talk about unsupervised categorization. So you could use unsupervised clustering, where you can group packets by behavioral similarity, and then you can really help the system surface hidden patterns and reduced analyst workload, which essentially means you can do more with less number of people. So that's something which is very, very pertinent in today's world. Then what is also very, very important is instant detection of unknown threats or new zero-day threats. So the outliers that don't align with any of the existing patterns get immediately flagged, and spotlighting these behaviors and identifying zero-day threats is something that one can look at. So this is a patented breakthrough and a clustering technique which our Bell Labs has actually developed, which detects both the known zero-day attacks in real time as well as a few representative packets with clusters. So this is something that I would like to bring to your notice. As we move on, now, if you look at a proactive threat hunting without Gen AI, you have to really depend on a lot of human intervention. And as you know, in case of a telco SOC, you need people with capabilities across cybersecurity and network infrastructure. Let me tell you, coming from this industry, it ain't easy to actually have people with both these skills coupled together. So the subset of people that you can recruit from is going to be very small, and then you have to, as the number of attack vectors grows, as the number of exploits grow, you just can't put more people onto the telco SOCs. So it is very, very imperative that you should look for automation. So for example, telco threat ingestion, that's something which is very, very important. So how do you actually map the latest threat feeds to the tactical frameworks like the Mitre attack framework or NIST CSF? Now, these are built for IT workloads or IT applications. So to train these, to basically interpret these and ingest the telco threats is something which is going to become hugely manual. Then you're talking about manual threat hunting. So somebody has to sift through the logs for any suspicious patterns. And if you really don't have an automated mechanism, support from Gen AI, I think it is going to be very, very difficult. The third one, which is very important to take note of, is hypothesis building. And really, how do you compile the findings into a detailed hypothesis, validate them, and drive manual correlation and analysis? It isn't something that operators can look at. And there are several others. How do you generate use cases and eventually generate response framework? What this will all lead to, proactive threat hunting without Gen AI, is alert fatigue. You miss zero-day threats because zero-day threats are far beyond the traditional pattern recognition aspects that we're talking about, and there is very limited scalability for high-volume traffic. Now, as you start deploying proactive threat hunting with Gen AI, you can actually utilize AI AI assistants that processes and maps latest feeds to tactical frameworks. So you can train the AI agents or the AI assistants to really map these. And this is a big task that can actually be done with human augmentation, I would say, rather than eliminating humans completely. Then you can actually have AI-powered hunt assistant that analyzes the data and generates a detailed hypothesis reports, which can be validated by the SOC analyst. So you see, from actually doing the work, you will have SOC analysts work done by SOC analyst work reduced by bringing in AI assistants, Gen AI assistants, and then they will be able to validate. The third, which is the third part, which is all about human validation. So the security analyst has the capability to review and validate the AI-generated hypothesis. So we are not really making it completely automated. We are bringing in human intervention and making it semi-automated to say the least, where the SOC analyst will still be able to interject, still be able to validate the hypothesis and review the hypothesis that is generated by the AI. And we continue to train the AI with the latest threats. We continue to train the AI with the 3GPP specs. We continue to train the AI with other CVSs that are very specific for telcos. Then you actually can generate automated use cases. The large language model transforms the findings into tailored security artifacts. You can build workbooks. You can initiate workbooks, or you could call it playbooks. You can initiate these workflows the way you want, and you can fully utilize the tools like Copilot. In one of our products, we've actually demonstrated how you can utilize Microsoft Copilot, which is what we call Cybersecurity Dome. Our Cybersecurity Dome leverages the strength of Sentinel and Microsoft Copilot to build automated playbooks, which can be instantiated by exceptions or by the users to make corrective actions. Last but not the least, we're talking about automated response framework, where you can actually drive AI-driven security controls based on identified threats. So you can automate, let's say you can define some of the well-known threats, and you can pretty much automate the response, obviating the need for the expensive SOC analysts to make intervention in there. So you could do it both ways, automated and semi-automated. So basically, the biggest advantages that you would ensue by actually driving proactive threat hunting with Gen AI are: you can reduce false positives. You can really focus on real threats. Based on our experience, you could bring them down almost by 30 to 40%. You can also improve the mean time to detection by 40%. So that's a big advantage. The faster you respond, the faster the probability is for you to really mitigate the threats. There is a higher detection accuracy because of the machine intervention. And then there is early detection of zero-day and emerging threats. You will see Gen AI plays a very important and a pertinent role in the whole process of threat hunting, and the kind of opportunities that we have are tremendous. It can, in fact, we've also demonstrated that a SOC analyst, if there has been an incident, can actually write queries on the Copilot and ask for very specific aspects about the malware. If there's a malware that is impacting the network, the SOC analyst can immediately ask questions and can also utilize the capabilities of the LLM model to generate a report which is very specific to a regulation. For example, a SOC analyst in UK can generate a TSR specific report of an incident that has happened in the format that is recommended by the TSR. So that's something which is the power of LLM, which can be utilized by the SOC analyst and their work can be made a lot easier. So how do you really chart a path forward for the telecom security? So we have actually defined this whole approach of fully autonomous SOC if you map it on a scale of 1 to 5, a Likert scale of 1 to 5, with L0 being manual. You move to L1, which is rule-based detection and task automation. This most of the operators do today. Then we move to partially autonomous. Again, you bring in ML. You actually actually drive contextual correlation and utilize ML to drive partially autonomous SOC. And this is where many operators are looking at and have already reached today. Then we go to conditionally autonomous, where it becomes very important for you to take full advantage of intent-based incident management. Then we move to highly autonomous, which is basically the proactive threat exposure and management. And finally, you reach the nirvana, which is the agentic AI and real-time emergency response. So this is the path that we recommend. And again, this is inspired by the autonomous networks or the autonomous operations maturity model, which is purported by TM Forum. We've just adopted that to the SOC. And we believe that these are different steps that the operator can traverse to improve their maturity level of the SOCs. With that, I end my presentation and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Srinivas. That was great. So we have time for a few questions. The first one, I've got three here. Let's put to you. Just a little clarity around Salt and Volt Typhoon, I think, would be useful. First of all, is it worth mentioning, I think, that in the case of Salt Typhoon, we know, of course, the identified telcos in the US that have been identified as a victim of that. I think Comcast has been identified as another one in the last 24 hours or so. Is it worth mentioning, I think, that in the case of the SK Telecom hack, there is a suspicion, a possibility, stroke maybe a probability, being very careful in my use of words, that was also the work of Salt Typhoon. Is that your understanding that some folks are looking at that and think that this SKT hack may have been the work of Salt Typhoon as well? Is that your understanding also?
So Patrick, in my view, it's simply a conjecture. We really don't have confirmed reports to say that the SKT hack was due to a similar action that has happened on Salt Typhoon. So, yes, I have read through a few reports which have actually drawn parallels between what has happened on Salt Typhoon and what has happened with SK Telecom. But I wouldn't really, till the time somebody for sure explains to me with a reasonable level of credibility that, yes, this is what it is, I wouldn't want to make any speculation.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the other one I would refer to, I think, is that there's Salt Typhoon is quite clearly identified as an attack on the telco sector. In the case of Volt Typhoon, the communication I've seen from CISA, the US Cyber Agency, is that their statement is that Volt Typhoon has hit various parts of critical infrastructure, including the communications sector. Now, that's the only thing that I've seen nothing more than that one sentence. But I think it is worth saying that while Salt Typhoon is 100% a telco-related attack, Volt Typhoon does appear to have targeted telcos as well, it would appear. Yeah, okay. And then maybe just one last point then. I think, or a couple of last points, sorry. When you talk, would it be fair, do you think, to say that what you're positioning from a signaling security perspective, and I've seen the demos of the Nokia solution, it seems to me is a kind of advanced level of signaling security. It's advanced, detection and mitigation that go beyond what just a signaling firewall can do. And I think that's great, brilliant. But I think the issue is that, most operators today, they don't even use the basic signaling firewall at all. So what you have in the marketplace is terrific. It basically gives those who are already using signaling firewalls, it gives them another layer. It enables them to do even better than they're doing now. But it doesn't really address the problem of, the majority of operators that still haven't got the basics in place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Patrick. And I think that's what we recommend to majority of the operators. And as I was mentioning in my presentation as well, signaling is ever pervasive and was defined and designed to actually drive the backbone of the telco communications. And we continue to explain to operators that our solution is not a panacea to all problems. They got to build from the foundational aspects. First, you got to have a proper signaling firewall in place, and our solution cannot obviate the need of not having a signaling firewall. Then you build on top of that. What you certainly do is automate and give more intelligence to the signaling firewall, but the basics have to be right. And that's why I said, just don't imagine that the IT tools that you have implemented on your IT side will actually work pretty fine. On the telco side, you got to look at a different set of budgets, different set of tools and people to actually run your telco operations. And that's something which is absolutely of paramount importance in our view.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed then, Srinivas. Great presentation. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everyone.
Well, I'm delighted to say that we have a startup, Flowsec, which is focused very much on the service provider space and focused very much on providing DDoS solutions for the service provider segment. Delighted to welcome our speaker, Dan Brunner from Flowsec. Dan, the floor is yours, my friend.
Patrick, thank you very, very much. It's a privilege being here. I hope you can hear me, just to confirm.
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, awesome. So thank you everybody for joining. As mentioned, my name is Dan Brunner. I'm the VP in Flowsec. And you might not all know about Flowsec. As mentioned, it's a startup. It was founded in 2020 by cybersecurity expert and network experts to try to figure out maybe a different way of how we're going to approach DDoS protection. And we have customers all over the world. And predominantly, as Patrick mentioned, we partner with communication service providers. We believe that that's the key in order to be able to do proper protection. And we're going to be talking about that in a bit. The talk today is going to be a little bit glimpse to the future. Thomas, in an earlier discussion, he talked about agentic AI, and we had multiple, as mentioned, indication of DDoS as the discussion and the conference went through. And we're going to be looking through the lens of the future of what we need to prepare for. Agentic AI, and okay, here we go. So agentic AI, literally from a research perspective, emerged at December 2023. And that's when it started, literally, we started hearing that acronym. In December 2024, this is where the hype started. And we are only 6 months and we're still talking about that right now. And we're going to see why we want to talk about it at this point in time. So what we're going to be covered today, we're going to talk about agentic AI. We're going to deep dive a bit on some of the previous discussion on understanding what it is, looking how potentially a DDoS attack might look like, exploring what can we do in order to prepare, and some of the challenges that existing defenses might have. So that's going to be the thing we're going to cover. I got a lot of material, so I might be running a little bit too fast. If it is, Patrick, please let me know. What we're not going to be talking and covering today is going to be large language model and some of the risk involved. That's going to be outside. So we made, as mentioned, one thing we want to do is to start with the definition of agentic AI, make sure that we're all aligned on what actually that one is and or what it's going to be. I think as Thomas mentioned, a lot of that agentic AI currently is a lot of machine learning, but what we believe it's going to be and where it's heading, it's going to be an AI that has the agency to make autonomous decision. It's going to be sophisticated reasoning, iterative planning, autonomous solving complexities and multi-step problems. So this is why we believe this is going to be a game changer, because we're going to have AI with agency to make decisions and with the connections to tools and other AI in order to execute them. And even though this is a brand new technology that literally the hype started 6 months ago, maybe less than a year ago, we still can see that the adoption is extremely fast. It's similar to what we've seen with Gen AI, that companies, starting to experiment, starting to see how they can use it as the future goes. From a cybersecurity, if you can see on the bottom right, it is estimated that 59% of organizations already starting to explore how agentic AI can go into their defense strategies. So we made a statement that we are looking, that this is transformational for the DDoS landscape. So just looking a little bit on that landscape as it evolved through the years, 1990 was the genesis, the beginning. And this is where we had simple SYN floods. It was very, very simple type of attack. In 2000, we started seeing more commercial impact. More additional botnet, ransomware started emerging. 2010s, Mirai botnet in 2016, September and October, the volume started escalating. We start getting to the 1 terabit per second ranges. And then in the 2020s, we start seeing more complexity, multi-vector attacks, carpet bombing, and much more complexity. 2025, we believe, is where AI agents are going to start going into the picture. Now, we're mid-year right now, but we still believe that because AI at any point in time, it's the worst it's ever going to be, it's going to evolve very, very quickly. And by the end of the year, we're going to start seeing adversarial experimenting, and we're going to start seeing this. One thing that I would just going to note historically, and this is just a nice anecdote, that actually the first denial of service attack was in 1974, and that was by a 13-year-old student in Champaign-Urbana. That's a whole different story. I started from 1990s. So why agentic AI have such an impact? Why we believe it's going to be that impactful? Well, the reason is that if we break down the term DDoS, distributed denial of services, every single letter is going to be impacted. If we're looking at the distributed, well, today, distributed means it's a basic coordination, it's centralized control, manual propagation. The denial is going to be volumetric, protocol-based, static attack patterns. Well, if we're going to look at the agentic world, well, the agentic world, everything is going to be smarter, faster. We're going to have enhanced bot coordination, autonomous propagation, which we're going to talk about it, and decentralized control. And decentralized control is very, very key. Also, the denial aspect of it is going to be smarter. Smarter targeting, smarter reconnaissance, smarter application layer attack, and continuous adaptation. This is going to be a key item because agents, they're relentless. They will continuously try to adapt and figure out how to adapt autonomously the strategy. Now, regarding services, if we are looking at today's services such as website, API, DNS, everything we know, well, we're going to have, as within any technological transformation, we're going to have a brand new type of services. So the attack surface is going to grow. We're going to have new protocols, and there's going to be more to protect. The term agentic commerce is already floating around and already have a lot of discussions. MasterCard already have tools to serve agent in doing those kind of financial transactions. Another way to look at the impact that agentic AI can have is looking at how DDoS attacks are being measured and how organization resiliency is being measured. If we are looking at DRS, which is a DDoS resiliency score, it looks at traffic volume, attack vector type, and attack sophistication, and what organization need in order to mitigate that. And it differentiates between a poking to a nation state based on all those parameters. Well, if we're going to be looking at from an agentic perspective, meaning that everything can be faster, smarter, every single element of this component that measures the resiliency will be impacted. By definition, when the first agentic AI will come, and it will come at a certain point in time, the readiness of all organizations will go down because they need to be able to do better mitigation for those kind of attacks. So why agentic AI is a true game changer? What are the main key components that make it a true game changer? Well, the first thing is that it's autonomous and goal-defined. You're going to define an attack. That's going to be the goal defined by humans. The agent will have to figure out the way. It continuously does learning and adaptation. It does planning and reasoning, and it autonomously can use tools, and it can communicate with other agents. And one thing that even exists today, like in early variations, it can decide that it can write its own code and program that wasn't scripted for, but in order to achieve a certain goal, it would go to this path and do this. So let's take a look at how potentially agentic AI DDoS attack can look like. So on the left side of the screen, we got an attack that Flowsec defended and mitigated at the beginning of 2024. It's a persistent attack based on the RDS definitions. Its communication service provider was the customer that was impacted, and the profiler was about 600 gig volume, 1500 variation over 7 hours, and the peak packet per second was about 7 million. And what was done, there was automatic mitigation. Then there was some manual fine-tuning. There was automatic communication and coordination, as well as some manual communication that was done as well. So this was done today. But how things potentially can look tomorrow? Well, in an agentic world, the beginning might be very, very similar. And we heard yesterday on some of the focus on reconnaissance. So first, you're going to have an agent that's going to be supervised by an adversarial human. And they're going to start by doing reconnaissance. They will do a carpet bombing. They're going to do multi-vector attack. They're going to start poking around the security network and trying to figure out what there is. And this is where things are going to change a bit. Because the second phase, once they got that information from the reconnaissance, their ability to reason and to deduce what is going on, what are the defenses, is going to be better than today. So in this particular case, potentially, an agent can create a Python program to do further analysis, communicate with certain tools. And this is on the fly as the attack is happening in order to gather more information. And it can communicate with other agents. It can see whether there was a brand new vulnerability from yesterday, try to gather all that information based on that initial reconnaissance. And based on this, in this particular case, it got to a conclusion that the defenses are focusing on specific, HTTP header and certain traffic characteristic. Well, now it's going to go to phase 3, and that's going to be the continuous adaptation. And this is where it's going to change the strategy. Now, we've seen polymorphic attack today. We've seen multi-vector attack today. We know that those are happening, but just take that to another level. In this particular case, it might modify the HTTP request generation. It's going to cycle through new IPs. It's going to use a quick protocol, another UDP that might be less monitor for this particular case. And it's going to target certain vulnerability, which were recently covered. And this is a very, very simple scenario. But another option, another scenario that's going to be more complicated is a multi-agent scenario where the agent decides to be a supervisor agent. It doesn't make the decision of what needs to be done, but it spawns sub-agent, and each one of those sub-agents is going to be tasked with a goal. And each one of those sub-agents will have to be responsible to figure out how to fulfill that goal. So in this particular scenario, an agent might be assigned with misdirection and deception. Another one's going to go low and slow. Another one's going to go with a specific protocol attack. And the fourth one is going to be responsible to analyze, to look at everything going on, collect information, do further analysis, and communicate to the supervisor agent and the sub-agent so they can continuously do the adaptation. And that is a very mature way when agentic AI is going to get to it, but this is definitely possible. The attack of tomorrow, in the same persistent, if the definition are going to change, it's not going to be 600 gig, it can be 15 terabyte. Today, 5 terabyte was mentioned, today was one of the biggest one. Well, 15 terabyte might be a standard in the future. We're not going to have 1,500 variation over 7 hours. We're going to have millions of variation in 30 minutes or in 2 hours. And the number of packets per second, is just going to go exponentially. According to a research that Unit 42 in Palo Alto had, is that they believe that if adversarial will adopt agentic AI, the speed in which they can make decision and attack is going to increase 100-folds. And the time to exfiltrate, which was 9 days in 2021, was reduced in 2024 to about 2 or 3 days, but in certain cases, even less than an hour. Another thing that's, as mentioned before, that with a new technology, you're going to have new attack surface. So with agentic AI, and we are just the first inning, we are not even in the first inning. We can see that as new technology, we see multiple protocols being defined, and we're going to see more of those, and each one of those is an opportunity. What we distinguish here, and those are some of the leading protocol, that agent can communicate with tool. MCP was established by Anthropic and was adopted by OpenAI as well. And this is for an agent to communicate with certain tools. For example, like the MasterCard tool that was provided. But then we've seen that there's a supervisor agent and sub-agent, and they get multiple protocols that they can use to communicate. A2A was by Google and additional companies, ACP by IBM, and ANP is an open source one, and for sure we're going to see more. And each one of those present another opportunity that can be exploited. When we're looking at existing defenses, then it's not really apple-to-apple comparison on capabilities in case of an agentic attack. If you're looking at static rules and signature, well, an agentic attack or the logic within can sense what the rules are and try to do evasive maneuvers. If you're looking at rate limits just as a standalone, then an agent, can figure it out and can try to bypass it. It can try mimic traffic like a regular, do carpet bombing, go to a lot of direction, but each and every one of those APs might get, within a certain threshold of traffic and much more complicated. When we're looking at threshold-based detection, we can also see all kind of evasive maneuvers. And traditional AI against agentic AI, it's just not going to be comparable regarding capability, regarding reasoning, regarding the ability to do adaptation. So those are going to be some of the challenges. But one thing that I do want to point out is that in the future, not everything is going to be agentic. You're going to have agentic AI is going to be in addition to the threats that we see today. Not everything is going to go to this world. So we definitely need those traditional, but when the attack is going to be agentic, we need to be agentic as well. So this is a good segue to, okay, so what can we do? And nothing on this slide actually is not familiar. Like everything is familiar. It's just that everything that we know of and everything that we do, and much more than what's mentioned here, need to go up a notch when the threat is going to be agentic threat. If we're looking at the proactive, we need to add much more context awareness, trying to understand we are looking at that attack, what potentially stands behind the attack, not only what is happening, but try to figure out why things are happening. So in autonomous threat recognition, we got certain things today, but we need to be able to match it with agentic AI threats that are coming in. And the reasoning is going to be key. Behavioral modeling, which we do today, will have to go to the next level on trying to figure out how that might look like. Real-time cross-vector correlation, we do it today, like with multi-vector attack, we're already doing that. But we're going to have to do it faster, we're going to have to do it smarter, and we're going to be able to identify an agent type of attack that's going to try to go underneath the radar with all of our protections. Regarding threat intelligence, definitely the collaboration, the agentic AI defenses have to have collaboration in them. And getting that information is going to be key. But then the next question is, what can I do with that information? Can I get to the point that an agent autonomously can execute based on that information without human intervention? We might get there, it might be a necessity. And last but not least, it's going to be awareness. As we progress, and as mentioned, we're in the first inning of agentic AI and just the beginning, but as threat modeling, threat assessment, design of new products, the teams that are involved have to aware on what's coming. And again, it might be 6 months, 1 year down the road, but it is coming. And they need to start evaluating what are the vulnerabilities and what they need to do now in order to get prepared for that future. On the reactive side, and this is where we need to be able to adopt more agentic capabilities on defenses. And as mentioned, the agents are very much goal-oriented. So we need to make sure that we know how to define those goals properly. We need to make sure that we got dynamic mitigation, that constantly you got that adaptation, you constantly got that real-time strategy adjustment. That loop of learning, adjusting is going to be endless. Even though when we're looking at all that situation, predictive analysis and predictive mitigation seems to be impossible because an agent can behave in very unpredictable ways, we still need to be able to provide and some kind of an insight and some kind of analysis on defining, those kind of patterns. How that's going to be, it's too early to tell. But predictive analysis is still not going to be going for agentic attacks. We need to be able to be one step ahead of the game. And last but not least, we need to make sure that we got explainability. Anything that an agent does, there has to be a documented reasoning and transparent reasoning of why that action happened. So when the human, and we're going to get to the human in a second, part of it is going to, or the supervisor will look into it, or you're going to backtrace of why things have happened and do root cause analysis, you're going to be able to understand why the agent actually had made a certain decision and why he executed on a certain type of action. So talking about humans, one thing that I read, which was very interesting, it was an opinion, and they evaluated that there were three types of evolution. We are on the third evolution of human-to-machine interaction, where the first one was the internet, the second the smartphone, and the third one right now started with Gen AI and evolving to the agentic AI. And I think this is like a very interesting analogy because it gives you the magnitude of what each and every one of those evolutions had an impact on human life. And I think that the human role for an agentic type of attack will evolve. The relationship between like the humans or men and the machine will have to evolve. Architecture like, that involve, a man as a supervisor, the people or the expert or the supervisor will have to evolve. But human ingenuity and the ability to supervise and oversee and define boundaries and make sure that an agent cannot execute with roles that they are not supposed to be are all going to go down to the people. And I think that the people role is going to be fundamental to be able to build trust. And I think this is a key thing that I just want to mention. The ability to provide agency to AI to make decisions will only happen if there is trust that the agent will act based on certain regulation, based on certain constraint, and a lot of other criteria. And the only way to build that trust, which is going to be a barrier of adoption, is figuring out what's going to be the relationship with the human. And that is supervision. That is a continuous training of models. Another thing to point out is if we've seen some of the challenges and we've seen some of the things that can be done, just think the magnitude of challenge it's going to be for SMBs. And this conference is focused on telecommunication, communication service providers. And this is a great opportunity to try to offer the next gen of DDoS protection services, to offer simplicity at a time that the threat is evolving so rapidly. Because as we know, SMBs, they don't have the budget or the expertise, the time to invest into it, and the architecture is fragmented. So if we're going to go down, to just some of the key characteristics of what's a future ready and how to prepare for the agentic AI world, let's say. So we identify about 5, most likely there are a couple of more, but the 5 key one. First, we believe that the solution of tomorrow has to be scalable and cost-effective. We believe that attacks are going to continually growing. The volume is going to grow. The sophistication is going to grow. And we need to make sure that the cost in being able to provide defenses is still going to be economical, that everybody are going to be able to afford it. As mentioned, for agentic attacks, and again, this is going to complement, it's not going to be just an agentic attack world, but for agentic attack, we have to embrace the right countermeasures and figure out where logically it makes sense to incorporate those kind of agent on a defensive side. So we definitely need to make sure that we play this chess equally and both sides, have the capabilities, and hopefully we get better. We do believe that multi-tenancy is going to be required, especially to protect yourself, but also to protect your own customers. And that's going to be one of the requirements, definitely when we're working in the telecommunication. The thought process and the mindset has to be future resiliency. So we need to be able to continuously be able to adapt. We need to make sure we got our hands on the pulse on everything that is changing. We don't want to wait for the first attack, agentic attack, to get us by surprise. We need to make sure that we are constantly one step ahead. And last but not least, the human oversight is going to be key. As we discussed, the relationship is going to change between humans and AI, so that's gonna change. But we need to make sure that we are able to build trust and maintain it as the technology and the threat evolve. So we're getting to the end, and I definitely want to talk a bit about Flowsec because, as I mentioned, it's a startup, and most likely most of you are not familiar with this. But those 5 key core items that I just discussed, they represent the core pillars that Flowsec was established in 2020. And The first thing, as mentioned, is that we partner with communication service provider, telco, satellite, cable, everyone. And we believe that this is the best way in order to offer protection and to protect like the whole network.
I'm going to
So
ask you
scalability
in 60 seconds, if you would, Dan, please.
Yeah, 60 seconds. I'm actually right in time. So regarding the 4 key items, scalability and cost-effective defenses, we provide SaaS solution. We don't have scrub centers. We try to maximize the utilization of a CSP infrastructure as much as possible. We provide multi-tenancy solution, so communication service providers can offer it to their customers. We do believe that we provide future resilient architecture, and we're continuously working to improve it. But we believe we can deflect attack at any size with our particular approach. We incorporate threat intelligence. We got the Flowsec global shield to share information across all of our customers. And we have that human oversight components with built-in governance and human oversight. So with a couple of seconds, I got left just key takeaway, and I got to the end of the presentation. Agentic AI, it is a step change. It is a call to action. We have to do something. Core defenses will be challenged. Responses must be agentic for agentic threats. Human expertise will remain key, but the relationship is going to change, and proactive adaptation is key. We believe that the next generation of DDoS is going to be agentic denial of services, where agentic or the A is going to be the decentralized, distributed, and autonomous. And we are here, and we believe we can help. I know I didn't leave much time for questions, so my information and contact are here, as long with Iran, and we are more than welcome to continue the discussion. And Patrick, I know I ran out of time, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So just before we move on to our next speaker, I want to thank a member of the audience who messaged me to the effect that TACAX, the protocol that was mentioned by Anati earlier, was abused by one of the typhoons. And I went and looked this up just whilst Dan was speaking. And in fact, I found in one of the vendor reports that in the case of Salt Typhoon, while the exact method of obtaining credentials remains unclear, the attackers were seen capturing network traffic to steal SNMP, Radius, and TACAX traffic. So, indeed, that's what TACAX is. I was not aware of TACAX. Clearly, it's an enormously important protocol. Many thanks to Jonathan for introducing me, at any rate, and perhaps others amongst you, to that very important protocol. Now to our next speaker. In March, I had the great pleasure and privilege of attending the Global Anti-Scam Alliance Summit in London. This was, I think if I'm right, more than 700 live attendees, more than 700 online attendees, and it was billed as the world's largest gathering of the anti-fraud and anti-online fraud community. It was a spectacular event, and I thought to myself, well, I need to get these guys speaking at Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit, because telcos have a substantial role to play in this. So with that, I'm very, very pleased to welcome the chair of GASA. He is Jorij Abraham. Jorij, the floor is yours, my friend. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Pleasure to be here. If we could show my slides, or shall I just... here we go. Everything works. Thank you very much for having me. Before I go into the content, a small disclaimer. No artificial intelligence was used to create this presentation, and I'll leave it up to you to decide if any intelligence was used at all in creating this presentation. A little bit more about the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. We're a non-profit organization, and our mission is to protect consumers worldwide from scams. And we do that by bringing together all the stakeholders. So governments, law enforcement, the financial sector, the telecom industry, of course, but also consumer protection organizations, anybody who, for one reason or another, wants to protect citizens better from scams, or whose platform infrastructure is being misused by scammers to cheat people. Maybe taking one step back, what are scams? Scams are, for the record, it's a crime. And although not everybody sees it that way, but it's a special kind of crime, because people think scams are, you fall for the crime. But let me be very clear, it's a crime, and the people who lose money, who lose their private information, are really a victim and should be protected. The problem with scams is, and I hope Vodafone and T-Mobile might be in the room. For the record, I don't think you're scams, but if you look at the Trustpilot reviews, you would think so. And very honestly, Amazon, Google, we're all being rated very badly. But it explains a little bit, where does bad service stop and where does a scam start? It's a twilight zone. How we define scams is when there's a clear gap between the product or service being offered and what's actually being delivered. And there are many types of scams. And for the record, humanity has been scamming itself since we came out of the trees. This is an example of old Egypt, where the Egyptians were scamming each other because it was supposed to be good luck if you had a sarcophagus of a cat in front of your house. The archaeologists found more than 2 million sarcophagus of cats. Cats would not be alive, they would be extinct now if they would have killed so many cats at that time. And it was a scam. They were sold with rubbish and paper in it and not with a dead cat. Since then, scams have evolved. The tricks are usually the same, but what online media really changed is basically two things. One, you can scam a person remotely. You can be anywhere in the world and try to scam somebody else, which makes it very difficult to catch the scammers. And two is you can mass scam people, as the previous speaker was also elaborating on. And that changed the industry, basically. And that's also the reason why scams are growing so rapidly. For the record, the biggest kind of scams across all the nations are online shopping scams, where a product is either not delivered at all or something completely different is delivered. And the scammer has proof towards the payment method or bank that a product was actually being shipped. Number two, most popular scam are investment scams. And many of you will say, with these kind of return on investments, okay, this is easy, this cannot be true, and it is not. But we see, especially in developing nations where people lack the financial knowledge, there are huge inflation ratios, people actually do think that this is a great offer and go for it. And that's very unfortunate, because these are the people who really, really cannot afford losing money. But really, everybody gets scammed. I really believe if you haven't been scammed at least once in your life, you probably haven't lived, because you haven't taken any risk. You haven't been tired at one moment. It can happen to everybody. And the Squid Game is a good example of how fast a scam can go. Many of you might know the Squid Game television series on Netflix. I can strongly recommend it. And the scammer was very smart. He said online he's launching the Squid Game game, and you can already buy tokens in crypto for the game. And within 5 days, this scammer was able to get $3.4 million before Netflix was able to take down the initiative. Of course, in some instances, the victim could have known better. If you're buying a verified PayPal account, or a gun, or your driver's license, or your master visas, the scammer knows you will never go to the police saying, I ordered my master visas online, it was never delivered, I would like to file a complaint. It will not happen. And especially amongst the gentlemen in the audience, no, this is not a real offer. You're not earning money by watching these kind of videos. But you will be amazed how many emails we got. And of course, sometimes scams are too incredible to be true, but it proves how good scammers are at social engineering. A year ago, an elderly Japanese lady had a very long-term relationship with a person. In the end, he said, I'm an astronaut. I would love to go back to Earth, but I need money. Can you send me money? And she paid him 35,000 euros. It's not meant to make the victim ridiculous. It's meant to illustrate how good scammers are at marketing. They use every event, every crisis, every trend scam us. And we know that within 10 minutes after a disaster happens, the donation scams are up and running and asking people to help and send money. But scammers are very, very vicious. And an example is this scam where the state of Texas introduced new legislation. It became illegal to buy abortion pills. And already 3 months before this legislation came to effect, the scammers were setting up online stores offering abortion pills, targeting Texan young women. And it didn't end up with the product not being delivered and just taking the money. It then became extortion, saying that if you don't pay us more or do other things for us, we will contact your family and friends and tell them you tried to order an abortion pill. Same with children. My youngest son is nearly every day bombarded by scammers on games like Fortnite and Minecraft, trying to get daddy's credit card and PayPal accounts. And that's really now, we see now that scammers are moving massively to sextortion, where not necessarily they have a naked photo of you, and sometimes they do, but in many cases they do not. They just threaten you to expose you to your friends and family. And they're especially targeting young males, aged 16 to 18 or 14 to 18. And all these pictures you see here are very, very unfortunate. All youngsters who chose to commit suicide because the scammer was so aggressive in extorting money. And if they didn't pay, they would have to face the consequences and be exposed. And this shows how rapidly scammers can adopt to a new business model. It really grows from nothing into, hey, this works, and they massively go for it. And we see this with many scams, that a scam which suddenly seems to work is exposed and used continuously. I want to illustrate really that anybody can be a victim. We have a tradition, and Patrick was telling about our global anti-scam summits, to scam our participants. So last year, we sent to all the participants an email saying, hey, we would like to invite you to a free dinner. And these were cybersecurity professionals, anti-scam vice presidents, anti-fraud. We sent an email to 250 people. 104 in the end clicked on the link, and we got 6 credit cards by saying that you have to give us your credit card to register. If you don't show up, we will charge your credit card. So it's how easy we can be convinced. Only Jack was able to expose the scam, saying that Jorij would never pay for the free dinner. I'm Dutch, and indeed, we don't pay for free dinners. I'm going to skim a few slides to remain in time. Patrick, I think I have 15 more minutes. Is that correct?
You have just over 10, Jorij. You have about 11, 12.
Excellent. One of the questions we often get is how big scams are. And every year we do a survey amongst 50,000 plus consumers worldwide, asking them what happens. I think our biggest challenge is that 67% of the global population believes that they're either good or very good at recognizing scams. And then a few questions later, they admit that, yes, I've been scammed. So there's a huge gap between the people in general believing that they're very good at recognizing scams and the sour reality. We also see that the frequency is picking up. Nearly half of the people worldwide now get a scam message at least once per week, many more most days of the week. So we see that the scam frequency is increasing. We see also that overall awareness, and that's actually good news, of AI threats is actually not very bad. Across all the different countries, 32 different countries, we see that people are aware that AI can be used to create a fake text message or a dialogue via WhatsApp or a Facebook Messenger or mimic a voice or an image, etc. So there I do have some hope. I think very relevant for this audience, and this very honestly surprised me, is that across the globe, phone calls and text messages are still the most used medium by scammers to try to scam people, followed very quickly by social media, email, but still text message and phone calls are used the most. Regarding kinds of scams, I already told you, online shopping scams by far the biggest. And depending on the country, either identity theft, phishing, or investment scams are the number 2 and 3. It differs a little bit, but these are really clearly global, the most common kinds of scams. We asked the 50,000 people also, did you lose money? And this number came to be really as a surprise, because if you add all the numbers up and extrapolate to the global population, you end up with an estimated $1 trillion being lost in scams, which is about 1% of global GDP. What is more interesting is that we see that developing countries are suffering way, way more than the richer countries. So I'm from the Netherlands. 0.2, 0.3% of our GDP is lost in scams. In Kenya, this is 3%. So we see that countries like Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, and Southeast Asia are actually impacted by scams way, way more than the USA, Canada, and Europe. What we also see is that scams happen quickly. Most are done within minutes, maybe hours, but we have interviews with scam victims who have been in contact with the scammer for years. And every month, the scammer was able to get a little bit of money from the victim. So some scammers are really very patient and really, slowly take more and more money from their victims. Also an interesting fact, and here we see a huge difference per country, is that most victims discover themselves that, hey, I'm being scammed. But we see in countries where there's new legislation, like in Singapore, the United Kingdom, where banks and to some extent also telecom operators are made more responsible for fighting scams, that the banks especially take a more active role and actually are proactively warning their clients that, hey, looking at your transactions, we really think you should be careful. In Asian countries, we see also that friends and family play a major role in warning the victim that there might be being scammed. The reason people fall for scams is basically, the biggest reason is I saw the offer and I thought it was great and I went for it. But education is definitely a big problem. Many victims did not identify the deceit or did not have the knowledge to recognize the deceit. A fourth reason we see, especially with people with higher incomes, is I was not certain about the offer, but I went for it anyway. So they're taking the risk and in the end face the consequence. And that's I think our second challenge is people do not report scams. We think scams are one of the most underreported types of crime worldwide. The reason, mainly, I don't think it matters. And they're right. With the Dutch police, we see that 95% of the cases reported to them, they say very honestly, and I respect that, I'm sorry, the amount lost is very small. The scammer is abroad. We cannot do anything about it. But that, of course, does not help consumers report scams. The biggest frustration we asked to consumers is, what are you not happy with if your government is trying to catch the scammer? They have clearly claimed across all the countries as their biggest concern. They do think that many people are happy with their governments on awareness and protection. They're not happy with putting scammers behind jail. So as I said, we only see the tip of the iceberg. And scams are likely only 7% of all scams are actually being reported. And the number differs very strongly per country. However, despite the fact that they're one of the most underreported kinds of crime, we see that online fraud is now in many countries either the number 1 or number 2 most reported type of crime. So in the UK, 44% of everything being reported to the police is related to scams. In Singapore, this figure is 70%. 70% was being reported to Singapore police is related to fraud. And I think we're only at the start. Scammers are going more and more professional. I'm going to skip a few slides, but I wanted to show you this one. The International Financial Market Regulations and Center. It's a great website where you can see which other websites have been verified for crypto investments. But the 50 websites being verified offer huge return on investment. So this is actually how scammers build up trust with the victim that the website has been certified we're legit. In Nigeria, where one of our colleagues lives and works, there has been a huge social debate. Parents are saying to their children, don't go to school, go to scam school, because that at least you will make money. And that's led to a huge debate in Nigeria. Is this where we want to go as a country? But we see that some countries, especially in Southeast Asia, their revenue, their GDP from online fraud is really getting into the 20% of national GDP. So it's really becoming an issue. I was already referring to the scam compounds. We see that this is growing, not only in Southeast Asia, but also in other countries like now the Middle East, Mexico. Organized crime is really becoming aware that scamming is great big business. They're luring people to work for them from abroad. They're taking their ID. And if they don't scam people for 12 hours a day from their scam compounds, they're severely beaten. I would like to warn for the next slide, but it does give you an impression that these are not nice places to work. So in the end, scams are becoming unrecognizable. And I think AI has already been discussed several times this day and yesterday. But I do like to share this photo where a scammer was very smart. He merged a photo of kittens with flowers, and he offered this product online as kitten flowers. And people loved them. And what made the scammer very smart is he said it takes 6 months to blossom. So only giving him 6 months the time to scam people. And of course, we have heard about the deep fakes being used. And unfortunately, the video doesn't work, but it's incredible how scammers are now using deep fake to convince people to invest or to really believe that they are speaking to a lovely gentleman with gray hair while the real person looks very different. So how can we turn the tide? We do not believe that that awareness is the answer. Yes, awareness is always good, but research from the University of The Hague proved that actually educating a person on scams doesn't help because the person becomes more aware, and as a result more confident. And because they become more confident, they start to take more risks. So scams are a global problem. And as Global Anti-Scam Alliance, we try to bring together all the stakeholders. We facilitate intelligence sharing, networking. We publish more than 30 reports annually. And we just launched the Global Signal Exchange together with Google, which is now also being supported by Meta, Microsoft, and several other players to real-time share signals on scams. And these signals can be websites, but also phone numbers, crypto addresses, etc. And we don't do this alone. We are now an organization with more than 100 members. And I would really like to invite you to join us and join the Global Anti-Scam Alliance and the Global Signal Exchange to share data and fight scammers better. And with that, Patrick, I would like to give the floor back to you.
Thanks so much, Jorij. That was a great presentation. I actually had the fortune or misfortune to listen to a podcast over the weekend relating to some of the gangs operating out in Myanmar. And, they are basically essentially kidnapping people. And basically it's a form of human slavery where these young people are being made to carry out scams. They're given targets. They're trained how to do it. They're given targets. And if they fail to reach target, they're physically beaten and abused. And that's pretty, Myanmar is one case. I assume there are other locations where this is going on as well.
Yes, the United Nations published actually a report on this, and they have been able to quite well pinpoint where the scam compounds are. They're indeed in Myanmar, Cambodia, very northern Thailand. There were a few. Some countries are really trying to act like the Philippines, but it's very hard. I spoke to a minister in the Philippines, and on the one hand, he said, "I'm very proud. We identify a scam compound with 1,300 people in it. We were able to go in and arrest the scammers, but we cannot put 1,300 people behind bars because some of these people are forced. So we had to release most of them, but many of them were Chinese. They weren't allowed by the Chinese government to return to their country. So within 5 days, half of the building was full again with people scanning people across the globe because they didn't have an option. So this is really a huge concern that, scam compounds are not easy to solve because people are poor. And very honestly, if I would be poor and I need to feed my family, I'm high educated, maybe I would scam as well.
Mm-hmm. Jorij, thank you very much indeed, not just for sharing the pain of what's going on around the world, but for assembling a coalition of the willing to do something about it, including this community represented here. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
And our next speaker is from NETSCOUT, which is our diamond sponsor for this event. Our speaker is John Kristoff. John spoke at this event a couple of years ago, and he's going to be telling us about, we've had a lot on DDoS threats from both Roland, his colleague, and also from Dan earlier from Flowsec, but we're now going to talk about attack mitigation, practice and theory. John, welcome. The floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to assume that everybody has at least some base knowledge of DDoS attacks. And so I will skip over some of the details. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when I refer to DDoS attacks, I'm particularly interested in the type that are traffic flooding based attacks. That is where there's an over consumption of traffic that exceeds some threshold, either on the path, a link, or towards some constraint towards the target itself. And so that renders that service that's being able or trying to be provided at that target unusable or unavailable. And so we actually like to look at DDoS attacks as an availability problem, and we often think of it as a security problem, and it is. But really, it's more fundamentally an availability problem. And so I hope that we keep that in mind as we go through here. The effects in this type of DDoS attack is, of course, links are filled up at some point along the path. If you are connected to the internet through a VGP session with an upstream provider or a peer, your route exchange between yourself and the peer may go unstable. And that has the effect of decreasing availability, just because if you stop announcing your routes, that limits your ability to say, here I am, and here's how to get to me. That information will not be propagated to the rest of the internet. And of course, as your link or path to you degrades, there's all sorts of after effects of this. The clients who may be trying to reach your content or your network start running into timeouts. They may try to issue retransmissions, and all of this decreases what would be the good put in your throughput to bad put. That means the actual traffic that's actually trying to get to you is increasingly less useful traffic. And so we want to try to increase or at least make available the good put and not have all this bad put, because that just makes matters worse. Of course, this leads to, whenever this sort of thing happens, this can lead to something somewhat minor like complaints. If people notice who you are, you're somewhat popular, of course, you may be embarrassed. Your productivity may decrease. It could be a revenue problem. And while you don't hear about this too much in the news, it could potentially significantly disrupt your operation, that you even go out of business. And you don't hear about big companies having this problem, but it has happened to some organizations where they've essentially given up. We don't want to see that happen. So let's just talk about the mitigations or the defenses. We use those terms interchangeably. And probably the one defense that most people tend to think about right away is, well, I'll just put up some sort of firewall or a wall in general, or filter or block, or even rate limit traffic somewhere. But the first question is, where does that limit or wall go? If you put this constraint between yourself, your network, and the internet, that may really not do a whole lot of anything. That may simply prevent the bad traffic from eking into your network. But if the link is full and your router interface is congested, it's going to remain congested. That blocking of the traffic at that point is really too late. So you might try to look for ways to push that filter or firewall or rate limits further upstream towards the source of attack. Of course, it's not so easy if it's a network you do not control. So throughout the rest of these defenses, one of the things that really is key to mitigating DDoS attacks is not just that the attacks themselves are distributed, but the response really also has to be distributed. It has to be more than what you usually alone can do. Unless you're a really tremendously big network that has lots of pops and links and content widely distributed, you probably need some mechanisms outside of your control to do the mitigation. So you'll see that theme recur throughout the remaining part of the slide deck. One of the most common and really successful and long-lived solutions to the DDoS attack problem has been this idea of remote triggered black hole. This is a mechanism that's been around for at least a couple of decades. It's using the mechanisms within BGP to signal to peers and upstream providers through the routing protocol, in this case BGP, to say, look, I know you normally will send traffic towards me for these destination IP addresses, but in this case, for this target IP address or IP addresses, I don't want you to route traffic to me for them. And so it pushes sort of that filter upstream to the ISP that says, okay, we won't forward that traffic over your link. So that'll reduce, some bad put towards the target. Of course, this has the effect of also sort of completing the attack towards the target. It really makes your service unavailable to anyone who might send to it. But, this might be a sacrificial lamb for the greater good of the rest of your network if you have no other options available to you. So it can be a very successful mechanism in certain scenarios, and it is widely used, remains to be widely used. But it's a little bit of a sledgehammer approach. Something that can be a little bit more fine-tuned is instead of blocking specific IP addresses, you could have an upstream or intermediary network between you and the rest of the internet that does so-called scrubbing. And you've heard the term scrubbing centers and providers who will basically take your traffic and you'll route it through them before it gets to you. And the idea is that they have a lot of capacity, they have lots of links, they have lots of resources, maybe they're widely distributed, and they have these centers all over the place. And they can sort of divide and conquer. They can examine the traffic a little more closely. They don't necessarily have to eliminate all the traffic towards a target of an attack, but they can scrub it such that the so-called bad traffic is removed and only the good traffic will then be forwarded on to you, usually through a tunnel. This is highly effective. It's very popular. It's widely used. It can be very expensive. It's not necessarily so easy, especially depending on what your resource constraints are, but this is a very popular solution. There's lots of providers who do this sort of thing. And of course, if you are ever in a situation where you're under attack and you don't know what to do, obviously the one thing you might try to do is call somebody for help. And this is certainly a valid thing to do. You should always, reach out to friends and neighbors, and particularly your upstream providers, to ask for help. But when you do that, you really should be a little bit prepared. If you do it in a panic and you simply say, I'm under attack, I need help, that's not going to really get the situation resolved. You need to provide them lots of good information about what the attack looks like, what the target is, and hopefully the protocols, when it started, the target, all those sorts bits of information is going to be really helpful for your providers or any peers or friends that you try to reach out to in your network. Some people say that, they'll make grand claims about, I'm calling the cops, I'm going to report this to the FBI. And, that sounds very threatening to some people, but those with any experience know that those are somewhat veiled threats that, usually not much comes of that, especially on the day of an attack, unless this is a really significant attack against really significant infrastructure that has major impact on, like national level economies and major businesses. So while that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, just temper your your expectations about how much law enforcement actually do for you, especially at the moment attack is happening. It's not a bad thing to do, but, temper your expectations about the process that requires for any action to come of it. One of the things that you can do and you should do right up front before anything else is you should have friends outside of your local organization. So I have a link here to one of the groups that's available for those who have operational responsibility. You can go sign up for this group, this NetSec group, which I've talked about before a couple of years ago when I was here. This is a group of essentially network operator, information security professionals who do information sharing and can help put you in touch with various people at different ISPs or places around the world to help conduct some of this mitigation for you, do the incident response. Now let's start talking about some other ideas or things that have been implemented or proposed. Pushback is a generic term for something that is essentially like a congestion control mechanism, but in the network. So instead of at the end with TCP, where you're relying on the host to control the rate of traffic, you might want to have your network be able to signal between each of the networks to say slow down in some way. So there's a mechanism by which some ISPs and mitigation providers have used with DNS called generically TCP switchover, which essentially says, look, normally your DNS query is a UDP query, but I'm going to send back a truncated response. I want you to re-ask that query over TCP. That's a mechanism that's used to help facilitate the mitigation of spoofed DNS queries. You have other things that are built into DNS servers called response rate limiting, the RRL. And there was a proposal many years ago in the IETF that I thought was actually kind of interesting, but it never really went anywhere, called pushback, literally called pushback. That was a signal between ISPs, kind of like a protocol like BGP, but it was intentionally to signal, look, we're getting a lot of traffic from you of this profile. I want you to slow down or ease off or set a rate limit of some sort. Flowspec or flow specification rules came out as a proposal, which is kind of like that idea. So it's a little bit different than the original pushback idea, but it's similar. Flowspec is a way that ISPs can exchange filter-like rules over a BGP session. So you get a little bit of that. It's somewhat popular. It's used sporadically between ISPs. It's often used within ISP networks. Some DDoS mitigation providers like us, we make it available to customers. So this may be an option. It's a little bit more granular than a remote trigger black hole. So it's not necessarily a perfect solution, but it's a little bit better than the sledgehammer approach of just deleting all traffic towards a specific IP destination. Now, this was something I generally do not recommend, actually trying to fight back on the attack. There was actually a real proposal many years ago called DDoS defense by offense. And as provocative as that sounds, it really is not a great idea. The idea of this paper was essentially to say, look, when we are under attack, we're going to signal to the good sources to actually go faster, send more traffic. The idea being that they can try to flood out the bad traffic. That just really doesn't work. So, the ideas like this come up from time to time. Some have tried to infiltrate botnets and taunt their attackers or post things publicly. That usually doesn't help. It's usually not recommended to go do those sorts of things. One thing that's great to be able to do if you can, but it's usually too late by the time you're under attack, is to actually take down the infrastructure that's attacking you. If you even know what that infrastructure looks like, where it is, where it's coordinated, you're probably too late. You probably won't be able to do this, but people do try to do this. There's, researchers, academics, and those in the industry who do try to work towards taking down DDoS attack for hire services. In fact, we were involved in some of this activity that happened a few years ago, and I was a co-author in one of the papers that talked about the effects of this. And I can tell you, it's a seemingly worthwhile thing to do, but the impact of it can have long interval time frame for when it actually can get the work done to the impact it actually has. And the duration of the impact can be, unfortunately, relatively short-lived. So if you have the dedication, the patience, and the time to do this sort of activity, that's great, but most of us probably do not. But that's another thing that people have tried to do. If you have the wherewithal, and this usually means you have the resources, either in terms of building out a large network or the money to be able to provide service on one that does this, you could distribute your content. If you're a content sort of provider, distributing your content in as many places as you can on high-speed links, that would be great. That reduces the footprint at any one particular destination or target, and so that the attack can be diffused. So a CDN or an Anycast network is an example of this sort of thing. Again, it's not really easy to do, especially in the moment if you're being attacked, but this is what a lot of big content providers will have in place that will be there and ready to withstand the largest of attacks. And you may be able to take advantage of someone who's built that kind of network to put your content there. Separation is kind of an interesting one. It may or may not apply in your case. If you have, let's say, if you're a hosting provider and you have some clients who run maybe provocative or controversial websites, you might not want to put those websites in the same location or within the same IP address block that gets announced in routing as with all your other customers. You want to maybe provide some separation so that if one group of your customers is attacked, then it doesn't necessarily affect all the others, or you can do a different sort of mitigation response with some set of customers versus the other. This is difficult to do at scale, but it has been done. We've tried to do this in various cases in DNS service providers before. Again, this may not be so easy to do. It may require more resources than you have. But if you can separate some of your infrastructure, this is not necessarily a bad thing to consider. The other more extreme approach would be to just say, I'm going to isolate some part of my network. I'm going to take some piece of my activity and I'm just going to isolate it from the internet. I'm not going to maybe even make it available at all over the internet. We used to do this a lot. We had lots of corporate environments where you had a private WAN link to a bank. There was no way to get to any of those resources unless you were literally on net. Now, a lot of things have moved up to ride over the internet, even through a VPN. But that can, be a potential source of a problem if your internet links are down, if you're under a DDoS attack. So maybe we should consider going back to the old days of having some private links or some isolation. Some have tried to do this and spurned this idea of a fragmentation of the internet. Countries have taken themselves offline in some cases to limit information dissemination in certain times of maybe stress or strain or controversial points in time, such as elections or national emergencies and things like that. This is not so easy to do, and it may sort of defeat the purpose of what we're trying to achieve with global internet connectivity, but it's another potential option that some cases may be justified and called for. And then, lastly, anytime you're under attack, depending on how well prepared you are, if the less prepared you are, you may be very tempted to change things. And sometimes this is perfectly legitimate thing to try to do, but just be aware that when you're under attack and under duress, this may be the least optimal time for you to start making changes. You're at the mercy of being under attack and want to recover quickly. So, you may not be in your best bargaining position to obtain services for a good price. You may not be doing your best in terms of documenting what changes you're making, keeping track of the changes that you're making. You may make mistakes. So it can be very dangerous to make changes while this is happening. But certain things, such as maybe just upgrading link capacity is not so complex. It just may be expensive. But we often see this happen when people have never been attacked before, and then they're attacked and they start making changes right away. It would be much better to avoid doing that in the moment and have a plan and be ready so you know how to react if you ever get in this sort of situation. And this is kind of what I want to end with, is sort of having a strategy, be thinking about DDoS attacks before they actually happen. If you or your customers haven't done this, it's a good exercise to do maybe once a year. Just, even if you go out for lunch and just talk about, what would we do if we were under attack? What, how would we react? Who do we call? Who's responsible? What are our options? Will we know how to evaluate the attack itself so that when we do ask for help, if we do, will we be able to tell people something useful about the attack that's happening to us? Do we have detailed monitoring in place? NetFlow or IPv6 is really something we encourage a lot of people to have in their network environment. If you have any router that runs BGP, you should know what this is. You should have it. You should have some monitoring on your internet infrastructure for watching traffic flows. Ideally, if you don't have your own DDoS mitigation team per se, you should have someone who's responsible, either a network person or information security person, maybe a combination of both, who has some contact information that they can access offline or they have on their mobile phone, and they have access to contacts that doesn't rely on having internet connectivity through your organization if it's under attack. Having this out-of-band access to mailing lists, to reach out to people in the community. So having your private email addresses be joined to mailing lists or subscribe to forums or websites or whatever may be needed. And really, ultimately, you can't solve this problem again by yourself. This is not only a distributed attack problem, but it's a distributed solution problem. So my encouragement to those listening is you can never have enough friends. You should get more friends. You join groups. You should know who your upstream providers are, what their processes are for doing the mitigation, how to reach out both to them and just people in the industry, and not just people within your local geographic region, but attacks being able to come from almost anywhere in the world. Having some contacts who have an international connection is really incredibly necessary these days. If you're getting attacked and it's primarily coming from Asia and you're located in the US, if your upstream providers is maybe not necessarily helpful, or maybe they're overwhelmed, who do you contact then? If you have some friends in the industry who work at big ISPs, that would be great. If you have a community that you're involved in on a mailing list and you can share information about what you're seeing, that would be great so people know what to look for. But you need to have those friends or connections or means by which to communicate with those type of people to make all that happen. And you need to have it before the attack happens, of course. No one wants to be calling for help and trying to get friends in the moment of attack. People are just not going to be that interested in helping you and becoming your friend when you're under that sort of that stress. Your lack of planning is not their problem. And with that, I believe I'm well within my time here, Patrick, and I will conclude. You can contact me offline, or I think we have plenty of time for questions or discussion about this topic.
Thank you, John. I don't see any questions in the chat. I am going to just ask one. I think you may have alluded in some of your one or two of your comments to NETSCOUT has a capability within its solution architecture. From what I recall, you guys have talked about it at previous threat intelligence summits, which is an ability for telcos to share threat intel amongst themselves on a voluntary basis. The story in the last couple of years has been that that capability is there, it's inherent, but the adoption of it and use of it by telco customers hasn't been kind of, kicking off at the rate you might have liked. I don't think you gave us a lot of detail there. Might you be able to share a bit of an update on that one?
Sure, I can say a little bit about what we do, but generally that's something that's tried to you've seen projects and people try to do this information sharing across ISPs about attack data. And the one challenge usually that comes up is simply that ISPs are generally reluctant to share that kind of information amongst each other. There's some sense of privacy, or it's inappropriate to let each other know about what's happening within your network. So there's that issue. The other one is when you're not in a customer provider relationship. So unlike the case what we have with our product, there's been communities who've tried to establish this attack sharing platform. And if, let's say, I provide a service that says, oh, you should block these DDoS attacks, but you and I are in any financial contract relationship or even any agreement, it's just sort of an open source, freely available tool on the internet. Why should I trust that information from you? Can I trust it? Am I at the mercy of you making mistakes, or maybe someone imposing upon you to add a block that really isn't a DDoS problem, but maybe it's a government, imposition to block some traffic from a country it doesn't like? So those issues have come up a lot. Within NETSCOUT itself, I guess I would say it's a program that, yes, we have. We probably haven't pushed for its adoption further. It's not something we make money off of. It's something that's really, once you have the product, you can utilize, but it requires us getting our customers together to actually do. And I guess we probably just need to do a better job of bringing those customers together. And we've talked about doing that more, trying to foster that adoption amongst the parties who have the product to do it. If any of you have NETSCOUT products and say, yeah, I would like to do that, you should let us know. And we'll try to put you together. Maybe this is good motivation from your question to actually make that happen a little bit more. Because we could share attack alerts and you could share mitigations across customers that way. I think we'd love to see that happen, but we can't do it alone. Obviously, we need the customers to really be willing and able to do it.
Right. John, great stuff. Thanks so much for speaking today. Really appreciate your time.
And thanks very much for having me, Patrick.
Pleasure. So before I introduce my next speaker, I have a confession to make. I am guilty of providing misinformation yesterday. I really did. I made the mistake of saying that there is only one other person beside myself that has spoken at every Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit. I said that person was Roland Dobbins, and whilst it's true that Roland has spoken at every one of our Telecom Threat Intelligence Summits, I left out the fact that Michael Daniel has too. Michael is president of the Cyber Threat Alliance. I'm actually very proud to be a Cyber Threat Alliance champion, so my sincere apologies for the misinformation. Michael, lovely to see you for the 5th year in a row. And the other thing I should say, by the way, is that I had the kind of setup, quasi setup that John has provided for your talk on routing security was totally unpredicted. It was totally unintentional, but it's fallen very, very conveniently. We're at least talking. We've already been talking about router infrastructure, router security. So a nice setup for your talk, Michael. Welcome, and thanks for participating again.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I'm actually coming to you from London this time around because I'm actually over here for another conference. So,
all right. Well, give me a shout later on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, today I wanted to talk a little bit about this issue of routing security that Patrick just mentioned. And actually, you heard John talking about it in the previous discussion. And I think it's a really, it's a sort of lesser appreciated problem, but one that I think is very relevant to the telecom sector. And I think at a very fundamental level, right, we don't think very much about how information on the internet actually gets from one place to another. And we tend to also think of the internet as this singular thing, but in reality, it's a collection of more than 70,000 different autonomous networks around the world. And so you've got to have some process for actually getting a packet from point A to point B. And fundamentally, the protocol that enables those packets to go from point A to point B is insecure. And so, let's see if I can actually advance the slides here. Yep. And so it turns out that actually getting from point A to point B, it can be quite perilous, can be quite dangerous. And so why does this actually matter? Well, there are several use cases why someone might want to actually manipulate the route that the packets take across the internet. You actually heard one of them there. One of the things you can do if you misroute packets is that you can create a denial of service situation, and that can have an impact on business, right? And by the way, that can actually happen by accident along with intent, right? There can be accidental routing announcements that cause problems, but certainly you can do it with malicious intent. You can deliberately route the information stream in a way that allows for surveillance, for tracking people or organizations or information. You could use it for espionage, both government-sponsored espionage or even corporate espionage, if you route the traffic in the right way to send the packets through a place where you can actually set up a listening post, for example, or even set it up to do harvest now, decrypt later. So we can link that to the issue of quantum computing. And the ability to break cryptography, perhaps down the road. And so the circle in the center there is really the sectors that this, affects the most: telecom, finance, cloud services, governments. But honestly, any business that is connected to the internet, as we were just talking about in the previous situation, in the previous presentation, could be affected by a denial of service attack, by these other kinds of issues. So the underlying protocol that I'm sure many of your listeners know, is the Border Gateway Protocol, BGP. And that protocol is fundamentally weak. But that's not the only source of routing insecurity. There are the weak building blocks, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But there's also geopolitics, and the fact of how the internet operates is also a source of some of the insecurity. There is technical complexity, and then there are some implementation barriers to actually addressing all of these problems, which is the reason why this has persisted essentially since the foundation of the internet. And Patrick, I actually went back and looked at some of my notes about the first time I talked about routing security. I think it was back in like 2010 was the first time I really started looking at this issue. So it's been at least 15 years, right? So been going on a long time. It's in some ways, this is not a new problem. So what we're talking about here is, and what I'm going to propose at the end of this presentation is maybe some ways to start getting at this problem. But we know that there are weak foundations to the entire underlying structure of the internet. And some of it is not just the Border Gateway Protocol. Domain names, malicious actors can easily create bogus domain names. In fact, the conference that I'm at right now, we've been spending a lot of time today talking about this issue of, the rapid creation of bad domain names. It's easy to spoof an IP address and make it look like you're coming from one IP address when you're really not. And then the Border Gateway Protocol itself, the fundamental problem with it is that it assumes that all announcements about routes are trustworthy. Why would anyone lie about a route, right? And it's like so many things on the internet, it was built on this foundation of assumed trust. And lo and behold, there are malicious actors who abuse that trust. But geopolitics is also affecting routing security. Because of the increase in fragmentation, in other words, think data localization requirements, think even some privacy requirements in some jurisdictions that are not matched by others. All of those fragmentation issues create impediments to data flows, which means that understanding how the traffic is supposed to flow, what good traffic flow looks like, is very, very difficult. At the same time, nation states are really coming up with more and more reasons for abusing the routing security. And at the same time, because of that fragmentation that I talked about at the top, where there's that separation, that sort of economic decoupling that we're seeing, the downsides for abusing those routing protocols, for abusing routing security, the downsides have decreased for nation states. There's not as much of an economic penalty. There's not as much of a reason not to do it. And so that has increased the likelihood that both states and criminals would try to exploit the weaknesses in BGP for their own gains. Now, of course, there are technical solutions that have been proposed, including things like filtering the public key infrastructure and route origin verification, so the RPKI and the ROV. You've got things like BGP sec. And the problem with almost all of these is their level of technical... in this situation, we'll talk about some other barriers here in just a second, but part of their issue is the technical complexity of actually implementing these. If you look at what it takes to implement BGP sec, it's non-trivial from a technical standpoint to actually put that into practice. To actually do RPKI and route origin verification is, again, non-trivial to actually put into place. But nevertheless, there are some technical solutions that we could put into place to address some of those issues that we've been talking about. So why don't we use more of these technical solutions? Well, there's really sort of three reasons. One is that these security improvements are not free. It requires investment. It requires, and that investment involves both time, it involves expertise, and it involves money. And so that poses a challenge to organizations that even want to do it. As I mentioned, some of those implementations also impose some convenience costs, which means there's a trade-off between convenience and security. And that trade-off exists at multiple levels, from the engineers that are actually at a telecom doing routing work to customers. And really, there's been no competitive advantage. You can't say, because routing improvements only work once they're widely adopted. You can't really go to market and say, hey, we're at actually, our routing security for our telecom is better. Like that doesn't actually mean anything. So there's been kind of this tragedy of the commons as well. So how do we actually deal with these issues? Well, I think there are really three things that we've been talking about. One of them is an industry-led initiative that has really made some progress over the last 5 or 6 years. And that's the mutually agreed norms for routing security, or manners. And that is now managed by an organization called the Global Cyber Alliance, which is not my organization, but is a sister organization run by a lot of people that I know quite well. And they have taken over the secretariat for this project. But this is really an industry-led effort to get as many different organizations as possible to follow some of those basic technical and implement some of those technical solutions that I talked about. And there's other things that Manners does as well. It provides a forum for organizations like telecoms and other large network owners to talk about these issues and figure out a way forward. I think policies at the policy level, governments should be coordinating their regulations to help decrease conflicts and increase the effectiveness of coordination to really drive and make routing security more of a priority. And then finally, users need to be asking it. Like big consumers of telcos and cloud service providers and ISPs should be asking them what their routing security is like, and make that part of your procurement assessments of which providers to go with, for example. And if once there is a demand signal, then that will help drive an increase in uptake by the network providers. So that's really I know that was a very quick run through this, but that's just the topics that I wanted to talk about today, because this is one of those issues that I have come in and out of multiple times over the years, and there has been some progress, particularly with Manners, and I really want to highlight that as an effective tool, but we're not where we need to be. And there's more that could be done there's a lot more that can be done in this area to improve routing security.
Thank you, Michael. Your last comment there is in terms of the needing user support. It's something that I encounter over and over again, where on the one hand, we know from multiple experiences that in the user community, it usually doesn't take much more than a handful of big organizations to decide amongst themselves, get their act together to get things started and to get security solutions rolled out. And yet, we have all manner of areas where, even that lethargy is there. There isn't the collaboration amongst just the handful that it would take to actually get this done. And once they get the ball rolling, the rest of industry follows. What do you think it is that's keeping those handful of big banks, big telcos, whoever it might be? The telcos wouldn't be users in this case, but big banks, big industrials, whatever it might be, from demanding this and getting the ball rolling and getting it accelerated. What's keeping those organizations from doing that?
I think some of it has been a prioritization issue, that the routing security issue hasn't been as high on the threat list as some other things, which is understandable. But I think and I think there has also been, because the threats to BGP or to the routing security and the threats to abusing the border gateway protocol have also not been as strong as they are now. One of the things that I think is really true, Patrick, is I think as nation states become less worried about blowback and more focused on causing disruption, imposing costs, and doing things to other countries, they're going to look more and more to abusing the routing system as one tool to do that. And so you can imagine that, for example, as part of a blockade of Taiwan, that maybe China tries to abuse the border gateway protocol to enforce a countrywide denial of service attack on Taiwan. That is an imminently feasible idea that China could try. And I think we haven't seen that before to a great extent. And so therefore, I think now it is becoming a much more important issue for organizations like banks and other significant international players to really look at and focus on. And it's something they haven't had to focus on as much previously.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Michael. Terrific having you again. Appreciate your time again at our event.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So our last presentation for Threat Intelligence Summit of 2025 is from Edgard Rodriguez. Edgard is the Director for Cyber Threat Intelligence and Research at Rogers Communications. His talk is on priority intelligence requirements, the first line of defense against evolving threats.
Thank you, Patrick, and hello to everyone tuning in from across the telecom and cybersecurity world. Let me start with a simple truth. It is not the cyber threats we know that impact us most. It's the cyber threats we didn't think to ask about. And so what you see on the screen isn't just a title. It's a call to rethink how we prepare against them. So priority intelligence requirements, or PIRs, aren't just documents or checklists. They're foundation of any CTI program. They actually define what matters most so CISOs can lead with clarity. So over the next 25 minutes, my goal is simple. To give you a clear understanding of what PIRs are, why they matter, and how you can start using them in your organization, if you aren't already. Let's get to it. Next slide, please. Sorry, just having some. There we go. When I first looked at this statistics, and for someone who works in threat intelligence, this is concerning. It shows that the majority of cybersecurity decision makers are not incorporating threat intelligence into their decision-making process. But why is that? This is not just a gap, but a major risk for organizations, and CTI is critical for understanding and proactively thinking about cyber threats, which is the foundation of CTI. We have to proactively be there. But then again, I mentioned this because I'm biased. This is my area, so I had to highlight that. So the solution proposed is to use PIR reports that align threat intelligence directly with the business risk. And this approach can help CISOs and other security leaders make more informed, risk-based decisions. Next slide, please. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's 11:06 here in Toronto, Canada. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'll briefly share a bit about my background before we jump into the main content. I'm the Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence and Research here at Rogers Communications. I have over 20 years of experience in IT, telecom, cybersecurity. Rogers Communications is a leading Canadian telecommunication and media company providing wireless, internet, cable, and media services nationwide. My expertise has been in areas such as threat intelligence, IT risk advisory, vulnerability management, and critical infrastructure protection. I also held various leadership roles in cybersecurity organizations like AT&T Canada, starting in 2000, Allstream, MTS, Zayo, and for the last 7.5 years in Rogers Communications. I also, like many of you, have active members. I'm an active member of several industry groups, the Canadian Telecommunications Cyber Protection Working Group, some other cybercrime groups working with law enforcement, academia, and the financial services sector, FSI-SAC. Next slide, please. So, PIR history. So it's important to highlight, and it's fair to say that PIRs had their origin in the military. And now PIRs, or priority intelligence requirements, have evolved from their origins into the corporate world and have been adapted for business risk management and cybersecurity and CTI. PIRs were originally developed to provide decision-making advantage for military commanders on the battlefield. And as you can see from the visual on your left, effectively shows this technical evolution of the military intelligence room transitioning to a more modern cybersecurity center. This military foundation is why PIRs in cybersecurity today are stakeholder-driven, which is key, focused, and actionable. And just like in the battlefield, commanders would depend on precise intel to make fast decisions under pressure. So PIRs are now essential for focused threat detection and to protect against evolving digital threats. The image here shows what looks like a frustrated analyst surrounded by multiple monitors, cluster desks, visual representing the overwhelming nature of the problem, which is, we can all relate to that. So the message of this slide is that unfocused intelligence effort come at a high cost, not only financially, but also by straining operational resources. CTI and CSOC and some other cybersecurity teams, as you know, already operate in a resource-constrained environment. This slide highlights the key challenges that security teams face when dealing with unfocused intelligence. You see alert fatigue, misaligned reporting, and lost insights. Alert fatigue, like I mentioned before, is a major challenge in cybersecurity, with hundreds of analysts receiving indicators of compromise or just data overwhelming them without proper context. They're overwhelmed by IOCs, logs, alerts, and often lacking context, which leads to two things: missed threats and wasted effort. So through cut through noise, it's critical to understand the difference between data information and intelligence. The data definition is basically just raw facts with no context, like, for example, a malicious IP address. Information, on the other hand, is organized data with context or meaning. Sometimes, being in the role that we're giving or shared by the outside world, whether it's open information or closed information, list of, for example, malicious IP addresses without a timestamp or origin or source or destination, and it lacks that actionable value. Is in essence is useless. So Intel, on the other hand, is context rich. We analyze it to make those to drive those decisions, and PIRs are a big part of it. Executives often receive briefings that either miss the critical business risk or provide irrelevant updates that are not aligned with the previous reportings. So analysts, like I said, they're drawn into the noise, too much data causing valuable, actionable intelligence to get lost. So the key message is cybersecurity teams need a more focused, contextualized approach to intelligence, and this is what PIR can also help with. So how are we going to resolve that problem? You guessed it, again, PIRs. So what are PIRs? They're the key questions that stakeholders need answer to make more informed decisions about cyber threats. So, for example, a very generic question could be, what ransomware groups are targeting telecoms in Europe this quarter? The benefits, in essence, of PIR is that they help identify the most relevant threats for your organization. Another more specific example on the business side is, what specific threat actors are actively targeting our pending mergers and acquisition transaction, through which attack vectors, and with what potential business impact, which is what executives look at. Answering this type of PARs helps organizations to focus threat intelligence efforts on the most critical areas. So where do we start? Many years ago, when I stepped into cyber threat intelligence, we didn't have a structured process in place. We just received scatter reports, a lot of reactive work, endless indicators of compromise, IOCs, malicious IP addresses, malicious URLs, hashes from many different sources, many different feeds. So we were overwhelmed with data. We were assuming what our business partner needed from us. But then we were asking the wrong questions, or worse, we weren't even asking questions at all. We were collecting information without engaging stakeholders. And we weren't spending enough time in the PIR process. So on your left-hand side, you will see the CTI life cycle. I won't go through it, but the very first step into the CTI life cycle is planning and direction. And unfortunately, some organizations still don't take the time on this first step. This led us to review, again, the CTI life cycle, which starts with the planning and direction phase. And that's where there is the first step. There's a link between the CTI life cycle and the PIR cycle that you see on the left, on the right. That's where we establish priority intelligence requirements. But before you even get into that, you need to understand your own organization. You need to understand your threat profile, because it's also key before you start collecting PIRs. PIRs, basically, again, they're the foundation of the threat intelligence process. So start by asking questions. We started by asking questions. Who's targeting the telecom network infrastructure in North America, in Canada? Are we being targeted? Is Rogers being a target? Are there any specific adversaries targeting SIM swaps? Or what fees have high fidelity value? We collect a lot of them, but some of them, they're just not unique. How many are relevant for our environment and unique? How can we reduce the noise? Or who's calling our retail stores pretending to be IT support? So understanding your cyber threat profile is crucial before we move into PIRs. So PIRs, what they done for us is they help us guide the collection, the analysis, and the reporting. So we ensure that we address the most critical needs to be more focused and relevant. But just prior to you create your PIRs, you need to understand and create that profile. And more on that next slide, please. So the key to establish an effective threat profile is to understand your organization, obviously, the core business function, the technology stack, your clients, your key partnerships, your supply chains, and also the strategic priorities from the business. And ask yourself some questions. Are you more likely to be targeted by nation-state adversaries, or cybercrime groups, or hacktivists, or a combination of all of them? And the answer will be different for each sector, each company. Next, start by identifying your critical business assets. And this would include systems, technologies, infrastructure, and operations your organization depends on to function. By understanding your assets, you can focus on those threats targeting that technology, specific technology within your environment, and understanding the exposure that you have. Think of what will disrupt your business if compromised. Next, you will evaluate which of these assets are more likely to be targeted by threat actors. So you need to prioritize anything exposed, for example, on the internet. System storing sensitive data like PII or customer records, or is the internet-facing system holding intellectual property or proprietary technologies? This process helps you define your threat profile and give you a clear view on what needs protection, why it matters, and how it aligns with your organization's risk tolerance. With this foundation in place, you can develop targeted and relevant intelligence requirements. Next slide, please. So how do you do that? How do you develop PIRs? They're the key question we need to ask to all of the different stakeholders within your organization. This is what helps us drive our cyber threat intelligence gathering and analysis. And so develop effective PIRs, after you have understood what your threat profile is, you need to engage the right teams and identify your key stakeholders within each team. It is usually, from my experience, managers or senior managers that really understand the business and also the technical areas within their group. And if you have a small team, start with a smaller team of stakeholders. It could be just your SOC or your vulnerability management team. Those usually are the two that companies are gathering information from the start. But it could also be your IAM team or your GRC team. Next, understand from them what they consider critical assets. Because what you thought, and this is what we were doing in the past, what you thought was important, what I thought was important to me might be different for them. And this is an assumption. Sometimes it doesn't get corrected. That's how you start your threat intelligence program without going through the PR process. So engaging the right stakeholders, executives, security teams, and business units is crucial to understand their specific intelligence needs. Each business unit has their own need. For example, it could be that the vulnerability management team cares about, like I mentioned before, internet-facing systems or zero-day exploits information. Then it's your interview time. Ask questions using the 5 W's and H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. You don't want to overwhelm the stakeholders with so many questions, but consider this formula, and you can craft the stakeholder-specific actionable intelligence questions that way. What you have to remember is very important is don't expect teams to know what you do. Take your time to explain your role. Not everyone understands what threat intelligence team does or whatever threat intelligence is. Educate your stakeholders. Be patient and build that relationship. When it comes to questions, it's fair to mention there is a playbook from Intel 471 that has good spreadsheet on the sort of questions that you can ask your stakeholders once you engage them. Finally, you can prioritize based on business impact and threat likelihood, focus on the most important and urgent needs. And you can do this by assigning a rank of low, medium, and high. And each team will have their own specific priorities. For example, next slide, please. I wanted to highlight some key use cases for different business units. I chose 4 here, but in your environment will be different. This basically highlights how different stakeholders, from C-level executives to vulnerability management teams, need tailored intelligence to address the risk. Nation states, zero-day exploits, 5G equipment, or supply chain vulnerabilities. The use case demonstrated that diverse intelligence needs across your organization, from understanding geopolitical threats to evaluating risk from foreign suppliers. And in some cases, what you will see, once you start collecting the information, there will be an overlap of answers that you get from, let's say, the GRC team or the network team, because they're both concerned about that supply chain. What kind of equipment are you receiving? The SOC team, for example, too, might care about specific IOCs or IOAs, indicators of attack, the behavior of the adversary, about specific threat actors, the spiders, the typhoons. What are the TTPs? How do they map to MITRE? But at the same time, the TVM team might also care about something similar, or they both might care about zero-day exploit, just like CTI does. So now we have 3 teams that are interested in this information. And the more you aggregate the information, now it has a higher value within your environment once you start collecting. So it goes on top of the list. Now I'm going to collect. I've been told by 3 different teams, for example, that zero-day exploits is of importance. And in the next slide, next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight fictitious. There's so many breaches happening everywhere, but I wanted to kind of make a case of a fictitious case study where I wanted to highlight the benefits of using PIRs when a telecom firm in Eastern Europe was able to avoid a costly nation-state breach by proactively addressing the threat of a specific APT group targeting their 5G infrastructure. So we assume that we first saw the creation of PIRs to investigate what APT was targeting 5G. So the work was already done. We were ahead of time to understand what the TTPs were. And an investigation revealed that spear phishing campaigns was linked to this specific notorious APT group. Now that we had that information, the company quickly implemented security controls and briefed executives for a proactive response. As a result, we avoided, or the company avoided, a potential $2.7 million breach incident. So this fictitious case kind of illustrates PIRs reduce the noise, save time, and direct your resources to where it actually matters before damage is done. And communication is key. Creating templates from a CTI perspective, it will help you once you are in an actual incident. It will help you to communicate essential information for different groups. You can use the diamond model where you identify your adversary, your victim, the infrastructures and capabilities. But different teams need different type of communication or communication styles. Next, please. And in this slide, I'm just highlighting the different tiers of cyber information communication framework, where you can apply different levels of reporting. CISO level executives might be a brief report or a monthly on a quarterly basis. Operational teams might need threat briefs on specific threat actors or weekly reports. Tactical teams might need IOCs, perhaps on a spreadsheet, and more rapid alerts through automated threat feeds. So how do you keep track of all the work that you do and this success? Next slide, please. By creating metrics. The ultimate goal of PIRs and CTI is basically to enhance the efficiency by providing relevant information for better decision making. So the different type of metrics could be volume metrics, like the number of intel reports we produce, the sources that are being leveraged, the ones that we need to remove because they're not producing high fidelity information, impact metrics such as prevention of attacks. And with the prevention of attacks, you also need that feedback loop from, let's say, the SOC. Are the IOCs that we're producing false positives, or are they creating noise? So you need to continue that communication with all the different groups where you're sharing information. But these metrics will help you demonstrate the value of PIR efforts and identify the assets, the areas for enhancement. Next slide, please. And very quickly, I just want to highlight here, we all use tools. You can have a tip platform, a dashboard sim that correlates alerts. But the key is leveraging all these tools and technologies to turn the raw data into actual intelligence reports based on your PIRs. So I'll leave you with this. I think I just have one more slide. So here's my challenge. Go back to your CTI teams and ask them, what are your top 5 PIRs? And if you don't hear anything, now's the time to start. Next slide, please. So here's basically just a summary of, the key steps to effectively implementing PIRs. There's a lot of information out there that is open source. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards and I can send you different links. And, start by approaching your stakeholders for interviews to understand the organizational risk. Define those PIRs based on their requirements and expectations, and build that plan where you define the PIRs as a guideline to gather that information, and agree on the reporting cadence, the feedback. What kind of, was it a Word document? Do you want it by email? How often do you need it? And finally, deliver that intelligence to your stakeholders that directly support their goals. Keep track of your PIRs. And I believe if you follow these steps, it will help you ensure that your PIR implementation is effective and impactful for your organization. Next slide. I believe that's it. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out through LinkedIn. Any questions?
Thank you very much indeed, Edgard. I have a question, but actually one has just zipped in right at the death from a very good friend of mine who's a CEO of a leading telecom software vendor. So he comes from a very interesting place. And his question is the following. Where exactly does the ownership of CTI PIR management live in your org structure? For us, which, as I say, is a leading telecom software vendor, It lives with the SOC teams that manage vulnerabilities and incidents, but it sounds like you are saying it should be separate and or at a higher level, ?
Well, what I can say about it, thanks for the question. That's a very good question. What I can say about that is it will depend on the organization. We are, and I think the other organization is a telecom organization as well. We're a leading telecommunication company, 30,000 plus employees. And it makes sense from my perspective as the leader of the threat intelligence team for that role to be PIRs to be within the threat intelligence team, because we get to understand what the different stakeholders within our organization do. I think if it was the SOC, I think they're overwhelmed, like I said, with information, and they don't have the visibility or the connection that a CTI team will do, because we bring information. They don't have the, let's say, in some cases, the partnerships that I myself have with the other telecom sector, or the Five Eyes, or the cybercrime groups, or the open sources, or the financial services sector. So I collect that information, and by understanding what other organizations are doing, it makes more sense to be within the CTIT. But again, every organization is different.
Very good, thank you. Certainly, your talk today, Edgard. Michael Daniel, this previous speaker from Cyber Threat Alliance, has given talks at this event in the past where I swear the overlap between what he has said in the past and what you said today is at least 80%. So very, very, very strong alignment there. I suppose I did like very much what you said in terms of, from a threat intel professional perspective, people don't understand what you do and the value that you bring. So I really liked your comment about being patient and building those relationships. That again is a Michael Daniel theme. It's be patient, be in it for a long term, be patient, explain, be accountable, and just revisit that cycle over and over again. That's the nature of the business, right? I guess I'm going to ask one question though. On a couple of slides back, you referred to, what are the metrics, and you referred to volume metrics and impact metrics. Forgive me for being cynical, but I wonder if the management perspective is that it really is all about the impact metrics. I don't especially care about the volume metrics. Am I simplifying things a little? Is it as brutal as that?
Well, yes and no. Depends what your role is.
Right.
But I think when it comes to metrics, yeah. So what? It doesn't matter for them how much information you're collecting.
Right.
Is it bringing any value into my, are you protecting my organization, right?
Right.
And so I think, but from my perspective, as a technical person, I do care about how much information we're collecting, whether it's open source, commercial, government fees, because even in some of those groups, even within the community, you get a lot of information that is just being rehashed and it's not unique. Doesn't have the high fidelity value. But what PARs help us as explained to management is, I don't need to collect 100 fees. I only need to collect this many, and this will bring value and reduce the impact to the organization. Sometimes it requires investments on specific platforms where it aggregates, especially using AI, the collection of information, and that reduces the time for my team, which I think is key. And I know I didn't mention AI, but I think, there are new tools now, especially for smaller teams, to collect that information and help you reduce all that noise.
Right. Edgard, thanks so much for participating this year. You've been an attendee for the last few years. Terrific to have you step up and share your own thoughts with us. Greatly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes another Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit. I would like to thank all of our attendees today. Thank you so much for not just attending, but for being actively engaged with questions and comments, some private, some out in the open. All greatly appreciated. I do have to give a very particular thanks to my co-workers, co-partners in crime, Ralph Bartholomew from St. Albans Web Design and Ian Davis, both of whom are the architects of the event management. All of the stuff, St. Albans Web Design, as Ralph is pointing to, get in touch with Ralph directly or with me if you'd like to hire their services, I can recommend them greatly. We had a couple of snafus going on in the background yesterday, which nobody noticed. That's because these guys are as good as it gets when it comes to execute on these kinds of programs. If you have enjoyed the event, you might want to consider dropping me an email by way of a quote that I can use to promote the event next year. And lastly, as an event attendee, you will receive a recording of the event as a YouTube link. I should think that will be sometime during the course of Monday. You can then review that to your heart's content. Thanks, everybody, for participating. Thanks for a great Threat Intelligence Summit, and hope to see you again next year.